Welcome back to the Unbound podcast. Today my guest is Mickey Davis. Mickey Davis is a clone builder. He loves building clone rifles that have been seen and used in combat by Tier 1 operators, and usually there's some Gucci photo where a guy looks amazing with a gun that's just stellar and the moment is just perfect and it makes you want that gun. Mickey builds those. Rather than just fantasizing about it, he builds these awesome, incredible guns based on these certain periods in time where things have very distinct looks. And they're always attention-grabbing guns that everybody enjoys seeing. I don't know a whole lot about the clone world. I get the idea behind it, and while I like period-specific guns, I figured I'd talk more into the details with Mickey about clone building and other passion pieces of his. Mickey is also an EMT, and again, just overall fantastic gun nerd like myself, so if you're into that, you're into battle arms, those types of things, you're going to be in for a nice treat here. Mickey Davis, welcome to the Unbound podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. How you doing?
Not too bad, man. Not too bad.
Good. Well, you're here to talk to us about clone building, how you got there, and you're a paramedic. Yeah.
EMT.
EMT. Is there a difference?
So, a lot of people don't know the difference, and I guess we can tackle that really quick. So,
yeah,
two different levels of licensure.
Okay.
EMTs are lower than paramedics. Paramedics can do more. So, I'm an EMT at the moment, but I'm going into hopefully nursing at some point. Nurse practitioner, my end goal.
Nice.
But, yeah, at the moment, just a lowly EMT.
Right on. Well, regarding clones, you have a little different path to getting into guns and everything, and why don't you kind of take off from where all that started?
Yeah, so, this goes back to when I was in high school. I was working at my local Airsoft store, who actually you're familiar with, Sogo Airsoft. I believe that's how we got acquainted, was you knew the owners over there, and you had a shop at the time. They took me over to see your shop, and as an airsofter, I was enamored by the fact that you had like HSGI taco mags on the wall, because back then that was the coolest thing ever.
They were amazing.
Going back then, cloning is as much a thing in airsoft, or even more so, I'd say, a thing in airsoft as it is with real firearms. Because with airsoft, they wouldn't just clone the guns themselves. A lot of people would actually clone kit that's used by service members. I guess I should back up a little bit. So cloning is the hobby of replicating service rifle clones. So we have some of my builds here in various stages of progression. And how I got into it initially was being exposed to that through Airsoft. So I would see people that were building Airsoft Mark 18s or Mark 12s, all the Mark series rifles, which is a big Navy thing. They give the Mark designation to a lot of stuff. M110s and just anything under the sun. If there was a cool guy wearing cool gear carrying a gun, it was probably a cool enough gun that people want to copy it. And one of my first ones I built was actually the gun from Lone Survivor. I built a Airsoft clone that was actually fairly accurate. I tracked down a receiver set that was exactly like the one in the movie. It was a M16A1 lower and then a M4 profile upper. I tracked down the correct barrel, muzzle device, a replica of the suppressor. The only thing I couldn't get was the scope. I couldn't find the exact loopholed scope that was issued on the real Mark 12 and then used in Lone Survivor, but I even wrapped, the suppressor in twine like he had in the movie as a makeshift suppressor cover. And that DIY aspect and, the research that it takes to build these accurately and just that level of detail, it scratched a certain itch for me. And when I transitioned to real firearms, when I got into college, that itch followed me.
Nice. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I used to be in law enforcement, and I lived in Los Angeles at one point, and I found it to be a major pain to get to the range in Burbank that had targets on like a steel cable line. When you'd finally get it out where you want it to be, it'd bounce. It'd take like 6 minutes to stop bouncing, and so just limited training from stuff like that was already annoying, but that's where I discovered Airsoft was out there, and that was, I guess, 2008 or maybe 2010. But I dug around the internet and found out this website that I had already heard of, evike.com, was right down the road. It's like 45 minutes from my house over in Eagle Rock. And what a cool place, man. There's just Airsoft. If I could walk into a gun store that looked like that, it would be beyond incredible. And I was always a fan of the MP7. I never bought an MP7 Airsoft, but for the longest time, I wanted one because it was the closest thing I was going to get to an MP7.
Yeah, it's really cool that, cause, I mean, in the time I played Airsoft, which was like 7 or 8 years, I played it, you know, as my primary hobby. I was spending all my spare cash on some new build or some new piece of kit and going to games. I went to several, you know, big Milsim events that were, you know, attracted people from all over the U.S. In all my time playing, I got to handle just about every gun that you could imagine in any Call of Duty video game or, you know, any movie. There's pretty much a replica for anything under the sun, real or fake. I mean, there's even Airsoft replicas of the Alien pulse rifle.
Right.
So, I mean, through that, you get a feel for the manual of arms for a lot of those. Obviously, they're not completely one-to-one with a lot of real firearms. In some cases, they are. You know, gas-powered airsoft guns, it is one-to-one. Even the takedown is very similar. And so, my point being, like, the first time I got to shoot a real MP7, the guy handed it to me, and I already knew where the bolt release was, where the mag release was, the safety, and all that stuff. And as the guys, you know, the guy who was renting it out to me to shoot was trying to explain to me, I'm like, yeah, I already know. Like, it's not saying that like in a, you know, bragging way. It's just cool that you get that kind of exposure for weapons that you never get to see the real versions of.
I got to see that from Call of Duty because I was with another cop and he knew this kid. It was like, I don't know, 19, 20 years old, working at a grocery store where this guy used to work. And he was talking to him about guns. It's like, oh, you want to actually hold an AR? And this guy had never held one. And so Bennett unloads the gun and everything and hands it to the kid. And the kid just knew everything. He's like, how do you know that? He said, you've never held a gun before. And he's like, Call of Duty.
Yeah.
But like, surprisingly worked his way around that thing like it was nothing. So.
Oh, yeah, does monkey see, monkey do?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of stuff makes sense when transitioning from like the Airsoft replica to the real version of it. You're like, oh, that little button that doesn't do anything on the Airsoft gun is your bolt release or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's a cool way to get exposure to and just even see if these weapons are like ergonomic. A good example is like the UMP-45. That's a gun I have a love-hate relationship with. I built one that I posted about on the channel. When I had an Airsoft version of it, I hated the angle of the stock. For whatever reason, the stock is like angled kind of upwards on the butt pad. And if you just try shouldering it with it flat against your shoulder, you'll actually be pointing the gun upwards.
Oh, weird.
So you have to like really lean into it. And when I went to build the real one, which was a decade after I owned the Airsoft one, I go to shoulder it and I'm like, oh yeah, that is a thing. And I still hate this. I was already searching for like other options to replace that stock that, you know, HK built for the gun, you know, immediately after finishing it. And things like the MP7, the real one and the Airsoft one, both of them I have to be careful when I'm inserting a magazine because my big hands, I get pinched
by it.
I get pinched by it and I get blood blisters where it pinches me. But yeah, had my start in Airsoft and, you know, built a few clones, quote unquote, through that. And then when I eventually got into real firearms, I actually went from working at Sogo Airsoft to a real gun store. And with my first couple ARs I built, I wanted to be, you know, practical. You know, they had M-Lock rails or key mod, I forget. I had like a Trigicon MRO at the time and a Surefire light, and I just got bored with them pretty quickly because, you know, you're always running that race of like, oh, well, what's the newest, lightest, latest, and greatest?
Yeah.
Oh, now the Trigicon MRO sucks, even though people loved them for a year, the first year that they were out. Now everybody hates them for some reason. And then, you know, I went to an aim point, and then, oh, well, LPVOs are big now, so then I went to an LPVO, and then, oh, well, LPVOs are, you know, don't do night vision stuff well, and I was just getting into night vision around that time, and so I went to an EOTech, and you're just constantly playing this game of, like, whatever you have, there's always something better, the grass is always greener somewhere else. And what was more attractive to me with cloning is you build it and you're done. You build it and it's always going to be cool.
Yeah.
And there's just something to be said for accepting the limitations of your rifle and the role your rifle was made to fill, particularly with rifles that are used by like tier 1 groups in the military, which all three of these have a history with. You know, it filled a very specific role for them, and if there's some shortcoming of the rifle, it's either just because technology at the time wasn't where it is today, or because you're trying to make the rifle do something it wasn't designed to do. Perfect example, my HK417 here. This is the Salter variant, obviously a work in progress, no optic or accessories yet, but it's a 12-inch 308. What comes to your mind when you think about a 12-inch 308? Not ballistics.
No.
But again, the purpose of this rifle was not to shoot 1,000 meters. It's not even really made to shoot like 800 meters. But anywhere inside of probably 600, it hits like a hammer. It's a short, short being a relative thing. It's a short, handy package that's not overly cumbersome, that you can reach out and hit like a hammer out to 500 or 600 yards. But when I post this on, especially sites like Reddit, where everybody's an expert at everything, they're like, oh, well, that rifle's going to suck at long range. Okay, it's not built to do long range.
Right.
It's, I might be putting an optic on it that's more of a precision optic, but that's, not really what this gun is meant to do. So when I build a gun like this, or like the Recce rifle, or the Mark 18, that's another one that people kind of get all up in arms about the barrel length and ballistics, and they're comparing it to all these other guns that are built for other purposes other than what the Mark 18 is built for.
Right.
It's not an apples to apples comparison.
That makes sense. What optic are you planning on doing on that one?
So I have the optic itself, but not the mount. It's a Leupold Mark 6 3-18. It's one of my favorite scopes, and despite not having the best reputation online, they had an issue with the original ones with the turrets not tracking. 1 mil of adjustment wasn't always exactly 1 mil. But mine's got the updated turrets, and Leupold has vowed to fix any of them that do have issues with tracking and holding zero. But it's super lightweight and super compact for the magnification range. And the military, actually, it was developed for the military initially. They have their own designation for it. It's the SU-279, I believe. And DevGru and a lot of different groups in the military used that scope because of just kind of this really good balance it had of being a smaller, really lightweight optic, but having a lot of magnification for the size. And so the rifle I'm actually cloning directly with this build it's a really cool picture of a SEAL. He's in a helicopter shooting this, out of the side of the helicopter. And he's just got this crazy setup he's got an Atlas bipod, that Leupold scope, sitting in a LaRue OBR mount, which is a really big overbuilt mount for this gun. But it's got an Aimpoint T1 on an offset LaRue mount mounted to the side rail. Then it's got a LA5 PEC 15. It's got that suppressor. The gun's probably like 20 or 25 pounds as he has it there, but it's just such a cool photo.
Yeah.
And I've wanted to build one for a long time, so I'm finally making it happen.
So when you do a clone, is it typically starting from a specific photo?
Sometimes, yeah. So sometimes I build a clone based on just the parts list. So the Mark 18, for example, there's a ton of different photos floating around of everybody from Rangers, Green Berets, SEALs, Air Force Special Operations, MARSOC, which this one's a MARSOC clone. There's so many different variations out there. There have been so many different stocks, optics, grips, and accessories used on these guns. For this one, I actually liked the idea more of just having a parts list. Just how would it come out of the armory? That's why I still have the A2 pistol grip, the Colt M4 waffle stock, or whatever you want to call it. There were a few different stocks these would be issued with out of the armory. This is just one of them.
Mm-hmm.
The EOTech, the Knights Armament suppressor. But yeah, some guns I copied directly from a photo. The Recce rifle here, it's actually a funny story. There were some SEALs that got in trouble for helping, I forget the developers of the Medal of Honor video games. Is that DICE or Activision? I can't remember which one it is.
I want to say Activision.
Yeah, I may be totally off on that, but they got in trouble because they helped shoot some promotional material for the Medal of Honor. Was it Warfighter? game.
The one before that, I think, is what it was.
Might have been. But yeah, this was the rifle that they all had at the time that they used for the promo. They got in trouble with their higher ups for doing that, I guess without permission, essentially. But yeah, at the time, it was actually one of the last iterations of this recce rifle that we're seeing, because rifles like these with this 15.1-inch barrel, the Knight's rail, the Allen Engineering suppressor, those have been seen since the early 2000s. SEALs are notorious for, or their armorers at least, for like taking something like the Mark 12 and being like, I just want it to be shorter. And, they shortened it as much as physically possible, getting that suppressor to where it's just about touching the handguard. Rifles like this have been around forever, but this exact configuration with the Atlas bipod, the Aimpoint T1 piggyback mount, that was specific to that photo shoot or that promo material. And so, yeah, that was built directly from a photo of a single particular gun. Mm-hmm. That's why I have the Magpul CTR stock on there.
You don't like the CTRs?
I like them, but for this gun, I actually preferred the just regular Crane SOP mod stock. Mm-hmm. I like the cheek weld on it better, but that's what they had in that photo, so that's what I went with.
That's pretty cool. And you mentioned earlier that mount. That's like a crazy high dollar amount, right? For the T1 piggyback?
Yeah, so that's made by Wilcox. It's their 30mm ring cap mount. They have a couple of different versions of it for different like red dots, and they're all hard to find and expensive. I got this from a retailer that had like the last batch of them before they discontinued them. And I think even at that point I paid like way too much. Like that's like a $600 mount. And now they're upwards of like $800 or $1,000.
Wow.
I've seen some that are even higher than that if they're for like the Doctor side or the J Point.
Right.
Or, those ones were even made in less numbers, and they're used on even more clone rifles. So high demand, low supply.
That's just for the top half of the ring and the base under the optic, right?
Exactly.
That's nice.
It's there's actually a company that has made repros of these, and they're doing it right. They actually mark them on, I believe it's the inside of the ring cap, with a little divot that just shows this is a replica, it's not the real thing. But they sell them for like $100 or something.
See, now you're making me realize there's a whole other element here. Because you're going to have clone builders who are building clones that are truly correct, mm-hmm. but then you've got guys who are okay with repro. Mm-hmm. So, and the real guys into it are probably very anti-repro, right?
Yeah,
or just like, at least if you're not claiming it.
Guys that have a lot of money invested in the real parts, either just because they don't want to see their parts get devalued by cheaper alternatives coming out, or just some people are just elitist.
Yeah.
That they'll look down on it if it's not the real part. I'm kind of in the middle, as long as they're not trying to pass it off as the real thing, and they're not creating a problem in the market where now you're gonna have these fakes floating around.
Yeah.
That do kind of, because I think there is some appreciation to be had for the real part versus a repro. It's just It's a little bit of extra level of cool if it's the real thing, but if it's the difference between paying $1,000 or paying $100 for my personal builds, it's probably going to get the repro.
That makes sense.
As long as it's quality and it does the job.
Yeah.
Although sometimes I will go out of my way to find the real parts if I know they're at least feasibly obtainable. One example, I was still looking for the adjustable gas block for this 417, which is a must-have to run it suppressed. Like with the 12-inch barrel, this thing is super, super gassy and crazy, like over-gas. The bolts, the cyclic speed is way too fast. I'm actually looking into getting essentially either converting this gas block into an adjustable one or having somebody make one, mm-hmm. Which, again, would not be the real thing. But for me, it would beat the alternative of spending the next 2 or 3 years searching for that gas block, because I only know 6 people in the whole U.S. that have them.
And this is another thing HK does not want to offer to civilian market.
Yeah, they don't want to offer it specifically in the U.S. commercial market, because I guess they either don't see the need or don't see the potential profit in. The 417 has had that problem in general, with aftermarket sport not being that good for it, because there's just so few people that own these rifles. And when I say 417, that includes the MR762, the commercial version of the rifle, which this is. It's just a remarked MR762.
You don't call it Mister?
What's that?
So is it
Oh, Mr. MR
the
762.
Mr. 762.
Yeah.
And the Mr. 556.
Yeah. I don't even know what MR stands for, to be honest.
The gentleman's way. It's Mr. I don't know what it stands for either, but modern rifle.
Yeah, for these rifles, there's not even an aftermarket magazine option. It's HK or nothing.
Oh, interesting.
There's no lowers that convert it to take, P mags or like the Armalite or DPMS pattern mags. There's no stocks for these that aren't HK. There's no rails for these that aren't HK, other than, I think, Kinetic Development Group and maybe Geisley makes one.
Is that rail just a single screw holding it on?
2 screws. So on the
Two?
417 and the 762s, it's 2 screws.
Dude. So that makes sense. So on the 416, I've done their armorer's course. I spent 2 weeks at HK and went through a lot of their guns. I didn't do the 762, but it's just a single screw holding it on, and they torque it to 8 foot-pounds. And it's like, that doesn't seem like enough. And anytime I've seen 8 rather than 12, I swear if you crank those to 12, it's where you need to be. I always thought that was bizarre, especially knowing the night vision bits and everything people are adding to these guns.
Yeah, the trade-off, or the way that they get around that, I guess, and make it still a stable, rail to mount things to, is because the barrel nut is so long, it gets so much contact with that barrel nut. Then cranking it down to even just 7 foot-pounds, there's relief cuts on the bottom of the rail. Just little slits they've cut into it where it allows the rail to crush a little bit around it, and it just gets so much friction on that barrel nut. I guess that's how they get around it. Geisley does a very, very similar thing with their rails. Their barrel nut, in fact, Geisley makes rails that go on the 416 that they use the exact same attachment method. You crank on the barrel nut, there's no timing, no nothing. You slide the rail onto this long-ass barrel nut and crank down a screw, and it's done.
That's crazy.
I think Geisley, I don't know which one copied it from who. I'm assuming Geisley copied HK because the 416 has been around since like 2004. I don't know how long Geisley's been around off the top of my head.
Yeah, I don't know either. That's not a company I really looked into their full-blown past. They are heavy guns. They do seem overbuilt and over-engineered. However, when I took the class on the 416, my mind was blown. It's like the engineers took ARs and all tried to go separate directions in trying to perfect or add an extra feature just to make every little part better. And I feel like they did it. Yeah. It's more than it was really needed, but like before I didn't really respect the asking price. But after taking the class, I'm just like, I completely understand the asking price.
It's crazy how much they redesigned, not for necessity, but just because they could.
Yeah.
Between this and a standard AR. You remember how many roll pins there are on these guns?
I don't remember how many, but I know there's plenty.
Everything is held in place with a roll pin, from the dust cover, the buffer retainer,
your takedown pins.
Is
the spring detent that pushes on them is different?
The takedown pins are the same design, but they're the front one's proprietary in the 417. The safety levers.
But they've got something weird about the retention?
Too. You're talking about on the commercial guns. They require a tool to push out the receiver pins.
No, I mean internally. There's something with how they're held on, and maybe this is different on the 7.62, but the 416, there's something weird, like another pressure piece or something that just helped secure them more than the typical AR, but I don't remember what it was. It's been 5 years since I went through that.
It sounds about right. Typical German over-engineering. But yeah, I mean, when I stripped mine all down so I could have a shop remark the receivers and re-Cerakote them and all that, I had a baggie of my small parts, and I should have labeled every roll pin because it was kind of a pain to figure out which roll pin went where when I was reassembling everything. Just because there are so many of them, everything is held in place with a roll pin. I don't know what it is with Germans and roll pins, but they just love the things.
They also say once it's out, you replace it. You never use it.
Yeah, the exception to that is on the gas block, they have true roll pins where it's like a spiral instead of just this like a little C. Because the C-shaped ones you have to replace every time. Or don't have to, but you're supposed to. They're not supposed to be reusable.
And they've got the spiral ones that have the jagged edge too, right? Where it's rolled
like the floral kind of pit, whatever they call those. Yeah, not on the gas block, but they do have the actual roll pins that are reusable. And I thought it's funny they use them there, but nowhere else on the gun.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just such a lack of aftermarket support for these guns because there's so many little differences between them. The buffer tube on it is an original AR-10 spec buffer tube. It's actually bigger in diameter than a mil-spec buffer tube, like significantly bigger. The buffer, also in turn is a bigger diameter buffer, so that's proprietary.
Yeah.
The bolt carrier is proprietary. The trigger group is proprietary. I mean, just everything.
But a lot of the buffer tubes, receiver extensions, whatever you want to call them, they really aren't built as strong as they need to be. In combat, for actual combat scenarios, it's a part that will get damaged.
And even with these ones, so you can see here, I have just the standard original barrel nut that these guns originally were designed with. Newer guns, newer HK 762, 417, or G28, whatever, they have a longer barrel nut that actually covers up more of the threads. And the whole purpose of that is because they were actually breaking these buffer tubes off when they try to mortar the gun or something. Those threads act as like a starting point for like a crack to form, essentially. Also, the stock, when you collapse it all the way, it actually doesn't reach that castle nut, and so they made it longer to where the stock actually butts up against the castle nut. So if you mortar it like that, it's not putting all that stress on the buffer tube and risking breaking it. But again, because it's a clone, I went back to the more easily breakable one because that's just how this hobby is.
That's crazy. So you downgraded it.
Hence the name of my channel.
Yeah, which is?
Inferior Rifles.
Yeah, dude, that's such an amazing name for what you're doing.
It describes cloning to a T, and a lot of people get the joke. They'll be like, oh yeah, you're building a clone rifle, which is in every way inferior, outdated, it's overly heavy, overly expensive, but at the end of the day, it gets more looks than your off-the-shelf, 6-pound M-Lock handguard AR, with an LPVO on it. And not that I do this hobby for the attention, but it's the personal satisfaction of like finding these rare parts, getting a gun put together. Even if I have to spend months and months and months doing it, the end goal is worth it for me.
Yeah.
It's better than playing that game of trying to find the newest, lightest, latest and greatest, whatever, and just constantly switching out parts on my gun. Which, I have no problem if people do that. For me, it just doesn't do it for me. It doesn't scratch that itch.
That's fair. So I'm personally not into cloning, but I do like period correct elements, especially of things that have to do with the timeline of my life, So like, while I had friends that are over doing, the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, I was in law enforcement, so a lot of my setup's the same from that period, right? And so a lot of that same stuff, that's what I like to do, is I want to build the 14.5 M4. I want to have the Mark 18, and right now I've got a Mark 18 that's not correct to the standards you're talking, but it's the Colt upper where it's a monolithic rail, and I can't remember the name, but 39 something.
Yeah, I can't remember, like 6940 or something
69,
like that.
That sounds right.
Something like that.
But yeah, I've always wanted one of those once I got into night vision, because the idea of that monolithic setup, I'm like, that's going to be sturdier than dealing with all the issues we know about barrel nuts. And that's why I also built an LMT with a barrel from B7 and had, what's his name, D. Wilson, do the barrel conversion and everything for that, or the LMT conversion on the barrel, so it would go into the LMT upper, and that gun is freaking cool.
Oh yeah, LMT makes great stuff. I'm surprised that LMT doesn't have more contracts with the U.S. military, because they have contracts with the British military, New Zealand.
Yeah.
They provide full rifles, full designated marksman rifles or sniper rifles to both those militaries. But over here, it's like, well, we have LMT stocks on a lot of our guns. Yeah,
so that's so weird. It's crazy, some of the different things that come up too, because when I was at HK, they had these really sick backup sights that had a QD system where you could pop them on and off.
I know exactly what you're talking about, like the left side that slides back.
That's it.
Pops off. Yeah.
And I've got a bunch of close-up photos of that because I thought it was so cool. And that was a French request.
Really?
So they wanted that on their rifles. And
yeah, the French are big on their HKs, but their 416 specifically. I just found out not too long ago they actually have the Scar 20 as one of their, I think they call it a designated marksman rifle. It's got like a Schmidt and Bender 1x8 on it, but it's not the Scar 20 that we have over here with that PRS stock and Surefire suppressor. They've got like a B&T suppressor, and then it's got the folding stock on it. It's just a weird looking gun, but it's actually listed on FN's website. I think it's called the Scar 20 PR or something like that. But yeah, that's another whole aspect of cloning, is doing foreign clones. on my YouTube channel, I've started a series where I look at viewer submitted clones.
Oh, that's cool.
People send in pictures and build lists of their clones, and I just pick my favorite ones and I kind of showcase them, and I put the parts list up on the screen. So it's like, oh, if you want to build one of these, this is it. I recently did my first episode on foreign clones. It was like a viewer special kind of thing. And I was surprised at how many people sent in non-AK clones. 'Cause I was expecting it was just going to be nothing but AKs. When you talk about foreign,
the most used
clone rifles
everywhere.
It's gonna and I was surprised. I got one guy who sent me a clone of an Irish Ranger 416, which is like their Delta Force essentially, and then I'm trying to remember some of the others now. So one guy sent in a clone of the British L119A2. It's the one that the guy in Nairobi had, that British SAS operator, Christian Craighead.
Yeah.
One guy sent in a perfect clone down to like the paint job of his rifle. He mentioned in the email he sent me about it, he even used a British laundry bag to make the mesh pattern for the paint job. And
that's awesome.
That was like an extra level of autism. But
yeah.
I love that kind of stuff though. That's what makes this hobby fun to me, is just that DIY aspect, that the research, and just the fun you have along the way. It's not so much it's the destination, but also the journey, with building these.
I used jail-issued laundry bag from the sheriff's office, and that's what I've used. I still have it. I had two of them. I've got one that's complete, and then one that I've cut up to be able to work around whatever shapes and just put clips on everywhere for it.
Man, and all you got to do is stop a terrorist attack and use that gun.
Right, dude. Speaking of him, his book got denied.
Really?
Yeah, they're not going to let him talk about it due to whatever. Because he was there for other reasons, and
there's training, is what I understand.
And there's I think there's more to it. I think that's the official story that's not official. But yeah, there's some elements there where there's just too much, and they just told him a straight up no. It wasn't like this is approved and this isn't approved. I just saw his post about it the other day.
I wonder if there's like a time limit on that, like you can't talk about it for X amount of years or whatever.
I don't know. That would be nice, but it's like when we don't have that either. It's all got to be written up.
The gun itself, he's been pretty, I guess, open about. So whenever the viewer sent in that gun, or his clone of that gun, he said that he got a lot of the details from like interviews or people who have talked to Craighead about that rifle. Like, a lot of people thought it was interesting. He had a Sig optic on the gun. He had a Sig Romeo 4T.
Yeah.
Every other SAS operator that's been photographed with one of those rifles, it's had an aim point micro at some point on it. And he was like, oh yeah, the Sig rep just gave me one of those to try out, and that was right before that terrorist attack happened. And so that Sig rep probably got a nice healthy raise.
No kidding. Dude, I heard this, and I'm curious if you've heard on this, that a lot of the stuff where you see the Sig Optics being used, potentially FBI, CAG, all these different groups, that Sig is sending those optics on the guns for free so they can claim the optic in use, but the optic is not part of the purchase. Do you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So one specific example I know of, the Sig LVAW, low visibility assault weapon. It's a 300 blackout. It's based on the Sig MCX. It's kind of the predecessor to the MCX. People have cloned these. I've cloned this rifle. One of my most viewed videos on my YouTube channel is of that rifle. It's a really cool. It looks like it's integrally suppressed. Got the suppressor under the handguard.
Okay, yeah.
300 blackout, low visibility weapon system. Sig was, whenever they won, or I don't know if it was a contract or just a solicitation, or how essentially they wormed their way into that, because originally AAC at the time, Kevin Brittingham, was spearheading that, and that's how the Honey Badger came to be. And then Sig took over that project when Kevin left or sold AAC and went to work for Sig and designed all their suppressors and worked on the MCX platform. That kind of got replaced. That replaced the Honey Badger. And so around those time, those weapons finally made it into the hands of CAG, who was the primary user of those. Also, the Air Force 24th STS used them. They didn't have to. It wasn't part of the solicitation. They just included a free Romeo 4T on a lot of those rifles. And so you see guys that ended up using them even though they had aim point T2s and all sorts of stuff for those rifles that you could argue were better in a lot of ways. But oh, this is the one that came in the box, let's try it out. It has shake awake and all these cool features the Aimpoint doesn't have.
Yeah.
It's genius on Sig's part. They just throw them in the box, and like, if we're lucky, then some photos will leak out of cool guys using this, and we'll sell a bunch of these on the commercial market.
That's true.
And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's nuts. Yeah, I remember their marketing was talking about the FBI had selected I want to say that first one you mentioned, the Pro, and there's a T in the name.
The Romeo 4T?
Yeah. I want to say it was that one, but that was like all over the page, and I was wondering if those got tossed in on guns too, or if the FBI actually put an order in for them.
That one's advertised as their military grade, hard use optic, because they have other Romeo series that are much cheaper, like $100, $120 optics. Yeah. But the 4T is the one that has the best night vision compatibility. It's built toughest, it's submersible to deeper depths without, leaking. It's nitrogen purged, of course, better glass quality, all that stuff.
Yeah. One thing that I found really interesting here lately, we were running this night vision class down at APT, and probably half the class is running Hollisons and couldn't see. And we're looking through these, and it's like everyone's like, why buy the more expensive or whatever? You're supporting China, all that. Yeah, we get all the different elements there you can discuss with it, but it was wild. Like, some of these, you cannot see through them. It's like the glass was like completely darkened. Some of them were fine and looked just like an Aimpoint would overall. And I definitely want to do a deeper dive into that to see which ones, like, because it was crazy. Like, probably, I'd say at least 7 people had Olsons, and I want to say about 4 of them they couldn't see. And some was just like an older guy who's having a little trouble seeing it because it's too dark. Like, I can find it, but it's nothing like looking through the Aimpoint. I think I was running an RMR on a rifle that night, which obviously it did fine. You can see through it. Yeah.
It's needless to say, I think Holosun has proved they can make a good optic when they want to. They've made some that are not so great and some that are. There's kind of this two-way, or double-sided blade with, cheaper optics is a lot of people won't touch them because they're like, oh, well, I like the security of knowing I have an Aimpoint or an EOTech or whatever it is, and knowing the reputation and the durability that comes with that. But in a lot of cases, a lot of these Holosuns and other comparable optics are just as tough. They just don't perform as well in areas that don't matter to most people.
Yeah.
Like night vision shooting.
Yeah.
So, like a Holosun Red Dot, even some of their cheaper models, for 99% of people are going to get them by just fine. Yeah. Even some of their cheaper models now have like 30,000 hour battery lives and are substantially better than they used to be.
Yeah, I'm definitely the guy who wants to run the Aimpoint because I want that extra boost of confidence. But I've got enough guns that I'm okay putting Hollisons on stuff. Like, I've got a Tippmann M4 22 M4, whatever it is. It's an AR 15 and 22 where everything functions. It's actually a great rifle. I don't need to spend $900 putting an optic on that. And all that is a trainer. I have that just so I can be into the shoot house and stuff like that and do night vision training with a caliber that they allow where I shoot in those places. But yeah, I never want to Holosun on something that I'm going to run. And it's funny, I just got the Sig X5, the 226 X5, right? They've finally started getting those as they're American made now, after a language barrier for years of trying to get Germans to teach the Americans how to make these. And I went ahead and tried only because the SROs weren't in stock. I couldn't find them anywhere because I love SRO for competition optic. That round window is awesome. But the Holosun was Comp 507 Comp, their competition one. I'm going to trial that and see how that goes. But I don't have a problem with that for a competition gun.
Yeah, it's all about the application.
Yeah, but if I got a badge and I'm running around doing that kind of stuff or doing crap overseas, like, no.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of take the, what's his name, Lucas from T-Rex Arms, his kind of approach is, if the difference between an Aimpoint or a Holosun is going to be the difference between you buying ammo and going out and training, do the Holosun.
Yeah.
Like, if you're going to get the Aimpoint and then zero it and stick it in the safe and not shoot it for a year, don't buy the Aimpoint.
Yeah.
Like, the Holosun is absolutely better than nothing, and is better than not having the training to support the use of that rifle.
And some of the simplest things that you'll learn from training. That's stuff that you missed that you should have known 3 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever in your path that you missed versus going to training. You start picking up on these little details. And one I noticed recently was in a class, this was a couple of years ago, but I had the Wilcox G24 mount. And had no idea there's a detent deal you can push in the front and flip that from eye to eye. Didn't even know that was a feature, but it's something I learned in a class. And obviously you learn a lot more than that. There's some amazing things that come up. And doing armor schools, that's what I've done for over a decade. Worked on guns, painted guns, all that. And the armors classes, it's fascinating how much more I learned from that. You know?
Oh yeah, there's so many different aspects to firearm ownership. You've got, what did the engineers who designed the gun intend? What are the people who actually use them out in the field? How did they make things work? And there's just so many different angles to learn about these from, and you'll learn something new just about every time you take a peek at it.
Yeah.
What's that effect? The Dunning-Kruger effect, where it's like the less you know, the less you are aware that you don't know.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, basically being ignorant leads to, an overestimation of your knowledge. Smarter people know how much they really don't know.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I hope I'm getting that right. I believe it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. That if you don't actually go out and train with your rifles, if you don't understand them from several different standpoints, then you're always going to be falling short somewhere.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Dude, yeah, going back to like amateur hour, first time we ever did a lab raid, we're in the parking lot of the PD and switching our rifles over to hot. Just go hot, make sure you're good, pop the mag out, look at it. We didn't even do that stuff back then, And so I go to make my rifle hot and it doesn't feed. And then I go to rack that again. Still, yes, I'm doing this kind of stuff, but to show the real lack of training that's out there in the real world. Now I've got a double feed, the worst jam you can possibly do. And then I decided to use my lovely thumb and start pushing that dumb button on the side of the gun and cramming, just pushing those even further, running the forward assist. And eventually, I just basically made an ass of myself in front of everybody. And I got in tune with my gun real good after that. That helped a lot, and that's probably some of the things that got me into doing all that. For the longest time, like I remember the first time I ever bought an AR, I was like, oh my gosh, they're so complicated looking compared to a hunting rifle that it must be horrible to work on. And truth is, they're easy to work on. A hunting rifle is a pain in the butt. While simple, it's a little bit more of a pain working with the small intricacies of it, whereas these are just so straightforward.
There's some things you can only learn by doing and getting exposure to.
Yeah.
And this is not coming from a perspective of like, I've never been military, I've never been law enforcement, I don't claim to be, I'm an EMT. Not that matters when it comes to guns, but I've taken a lot of shooting classes. I've been shooting for a very, very long time. Competently, I would, go as far to say I was captain of my high school rifle team and got really, really good foundation for marksmanship and just, getting familiar with things like your trigger pull, the basics, and then got more into the tactical side of things through Airsoft and then real guns after that. So this isn't coming from a place of like real world experience, but I have learned so much just from going out and taking a class with a gun that I've had in my safe for 2 years, and I didn't realize that, when I'm sitting there playing with it, watching TV or whatever, I'm like, oh, I really like this trigger pull. When I actually go take a class with it and I shoot that 600 times in a day, I'm like, wow, I really don't like this trigger pull anymore.
That was one of the first times that really became a reality for me, was hearing people's thoughts of a Gen 5 Glock trigger in the store versus shooting it on a range. And it's like people didn't seem to care for the minor changes in that gun until they got out to the range, and then the results they're seeing on target they ended up liking more. And that was one of the first ones where I heard a lot of people coming back with that information on it.
That's where I figured out that I don't like a single stage trigger.
No?
At least not for a precision rifle. For most guns, it's fine, but and this is for me personally. This does not apply to everybody. There are people who are much better shooters than me who prefer single stage. But for me personally, the two stage is more predictable.
Yep.
I know exactly when it's going to go off. I can take up that slack, and I know that just the slightest little addition of pressure, it's going to go off.
Yes.
For me, predictability is nice. For some people, having that shorter movement of the trigger is better.
Yeah, I know like a lot of people in competition love like the CMC triggers for an AR. And those are insane. Like once you touch it and go into it, it's going bang. And I'm with you on that. I love the 2-stage. I run the Geissele SSAE on practically
That's pretty much what I use on everything.
And I love that, first off, my rifle comes up, which means selector's in the off position. I come into the trigger. I then stage the trigger to the wall, and then I'm ready to crack my shot when I want my shot. And all those little staging elements there, while it can be in a split second of it all taking place, I'm so much more comfortable with that and feel like I have control where you can't have an accident like you could with a single action. Touch it and it goes.
Exactly. I do feel like I'm more prone to like an accidental or negligent discharge with a single stage. Again, that comes down to training. There's plenty of people running really light single stage triggers out there who don't have negligent discharges. For me, it's a mental thing of I want that trigger to be predictable. I'm so set in my ways on that I don't want anything else.
Yeah. The one thing I will say where it helped me is when you're learning to trust a gun to shoot itself, as when you're learning the basics of marksmanship. I don't ever like to think of just you shooting the gun. The gun is the trigger. You're operating that mechanism, but the gun is deciding when it wants to go bang. And hearing that and trying to train on that for nice and tight groups, I eventually got there by shooting 40 cal. I hate saying that part. But it was a Cerakote 941, the IMIs, pre-IWI, back when they still had some government control. That gun has this just kind of roll through the wall and break. But you come up, you feel the wall, you roll through it, and it breaks slightly unpredictably. So it's overall the same spot, but you still can't. It's not like a Glock wall you can feel. Or
a predictable trigger will always be easier to shoot than a really, really light but unpredictable trigger, in my opinion.
But what I loved about that at the time when I was trying to train slow fire marksmanship, it forced me to recognize all I'm doing is operating a mechanism, and the gun is going to decide when it's going to shoot. So you're watching that front sight, and you're looking at the shake, and I feel like the amateur hour thing to do is you're seeing that wobble, and you want to yank that trigger when you see it cross, right? That gun forced me to recognize none of this shake matters. And I just keep simply adding pressure onto that trigger that's consistent, maintaining focus on the front sight or the red dot, threat focused, and simply pull the trigger. It's beautiful. And I shot my first 10-yard group. There were those Dirty Bird shooting C's, and the red ring, I'd say, is probably 1.5 inches in size, but all 10 rounds in that from 10 yards. I've gotten somewhere.
I think it's funny how this I can speak to personally because when I was captain of my high school's rifle team, I would teach new people who joined the team how to shoot, and then just in the course of getting into real firearms, working at a gun store, I've taken a lot of new shooters to the range, and it's funny to me how we present marksmanship as like this strict, like by the book thing to new shooters. And then later on, as they get more adept, they get more into guns, and they kind of join the real gun crowd. It's like, they're like, oh yeah, so you pull the trigger with the middle of the pad of your finger, right? And it's like, well, yes, but really no. It's, they teach that as like a must-have for marksmanship when you first are teaching somebody to shoot. And then later on, it's like, well, do you shoot better? Like, I personally shoot better putting the trigger on the first little joints on my...
It's funny you say that, because I remember Steve Collins, a friend of mine who was in the Army Marksmanship unit, he referenced a guy that was in there who was basically an NBA basketball player size dude. And that guy went all the way to his main knuckle, which is on a Beretta, the fattest grips out there.
It would make no sense for that guy to pull the trigger with the pad of his finger, because his finger would be sticking an inch out of the trigger guard, and he would be applying leftward pressure if he was trying to use that much inward of his or outward of his finger.
Right.
And I have the same exact issue. If I use the middle of the swirl of my finger like they teach every new shooter, I actually push the gun to the left. I have to choke up on it and use the first bend on my index finger, and that's what allows me to pull the trigger straight back.
That's interesting. See, I don't quite go to that, but almost you can see a dent there. Maybe that's from triggers over the years, but just almost to that first knuckle.
Yeah, we present it to new shooters as like this strict thing, and I had another example that was floating around in my head, but anyway, you present it as a strict thing, and then eventually, as they get more adept, you're like, just do what works.
Well, let's look at everybody now who's finally recognizing in tactical applications with rapid fire that controlling the recoil is really where it matters. And all these guys who are out there, they're teaching slapping the trigger now. I also trained with Boone and Tonto, the big gauzy guys, and this is 5 or 6 years ago, but that was the first time I had someone teaching me as soon as the gun goes bang, you reset. Whereas I would go bang, once the shot's cleared, it's almost like playing golf. You look at the ball, and until you finish your swing before you look up. But if you start trying to watch the ball, you're going to slip off before the ball because you're starting that early move. Same thing with guns. We want to see where we hit on the target. So if we're watching for that, like I would intentionally shoot indoor ranges. They had a black background, and I'd get those crappy NRA targets, which is the black circle, and put that at 10 yards out so I couldn't see my holes. So I couldn't pay attention to where those shots were going. But they were teaching to hit that reset immediately to where you're ready for that next shot. Well, you kind of got to slap the trigger to do that. And Tonto, I ended up seeing on his YouTube channel the best way I've ever seen that taught. As guys were shooting, he'd yell, reset. I want to say even hit him too, because they're like, bang, reset, bang, reset, bang, reset. Just trying to get people to do that. Get off the trigger, flip that out. And I couldn't do that at all when I took the class with him. I was so set in my ways of holding on to that. And I'm still not great with that, but I also shoot way faster than the average person, so I'm not too worried about it. But I love trying all the new things. And Modern Samurai Project. Whole new what to his grip was insane. But then all of a sudden one day, or like probably 4 hours into it, it finally clicked, and I'm like, my gun feels like it's barely moving. Yeah, it doesn't just not move like he'll say in his YouTube videos, and you can see obviously the gun is recoiling, but that gun does its thing and cycles right back. And it's crazy, but it doesn't make any sense how holding the gun like that works. And his whole deal is, I applied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, body mechanics, to shooting where people were failing to do that. Cool.
I remember my other example now. It was the old verbiage that you should let the gun surprise you when it goes off.
Yeah.
You pull the trigger, just pull it, and let the gun surprise you. Well, then as you get into more serious shooting, you talk to guys who talk to LR or ELR shooters, extreme long range. They don't do that shit. They know exactly when their trigger's going to go off. They know when they want to break that shot.
Yeah.
And they want it to be predictable. They don't want the gun to surprise them. What you don't want, and what we're actually trying to teach new shooters and failing to do with verbiage like that, is to teach them not to anticipate.
Yes, 100%.
The recoil.
That's why I still use that verbiage in the beginning, just to make sure they're understanding that part. And I guess I should actually use more words on that, focusing on that. I need to make sure they know that's why we're doing that.
The way that I typically teach it to people is, the gun is going to kick, it's going to push you, let it. Don't fight it.
Right.
Don't try and jump and lean into it or punch back. Just let it knock the shit out of you. I don't care if it's a 223, 9mm, 308, what it is. Whatever gun, for the first time I go out and shoot a new gun that I get, I go out and I just see what the recoil is like. I'll run a mag through it and just let it push me around and be like, okay, I know what to expect when it goes off. Now I have no need to anticipate it. But you get a new shooter out there and you're telling them to let it surprise them, well, it's going to surprise them, and they're going to have a knee-jerk reaction to that. Instead of teaching them to let it surprise them, teach them to just go with it. You want to control the recoil, obviously, to an extent, but you don't want to react to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And that's where you run into issues also with tightening the grip and things like that when people are doing that. But that's, a lot of times I'll just give a person a single round. You're just going to shoot a single round at a time and just focus on that. I just worked with a friend the other day, Shane, and it was amazing just getting him through that. And all it is really his only issue is anticipation. That's it. And then once he pushed through that, his group size was half of what it was, and we had it down in 6 minutes. And he's a Marine. He knows the overall everything he needs to know about shooting. Just there's a little reminder to let that part quit. He's ultimately the anticipation element was also he's dealing with that shake, and not ignoring it, and he's going ahead and ganking the trigger when he thinks it's time. But it was the combination of those two that were throwing the shots, and once he was able to, move past those two things, he started just killing out the center.
One of the people who taught me how to shoot early on, he was talking about, and I didn't get it at the time, and now I do, is timing the shot. If you're, especially from like a standing position or just a less steady position, you're not able to hold that reticle or that iron sight, whatever it is, on dead center on your target for any amount of time. You're kind of swaying a little bit. Time the shot as you're passing over the bullseye. At the time, I didn't get that. I was like, no, I'm just going to try and be a statue, and I'm going to try and hold my sights on the bullseye as tightly as I can. And later on, especially getting into magnified optics, getting into PRS stuff, I immediately saw what he meant, and I was like, okay, that makes way more sense than what I was doing.
So I'm mostly a pistolero, and so that I feel like doesn't completely apply there. But then when I started thinking of rifle, as you're saying that, 100%, I definitely do that with rifle, especially with magnification in the mix.
And it's not something you consciously do with iron sights as much, but magnified optics, it's so much more exaggerated because you have those crosshairs that are such a fine point of aim. You really see all that movement. Iron sights, by nature, you don't see that movement nearly as much. As long as you're kind of floating around somewhere if you're shooting a silhouette and you're floating around somewhere on the chest, you don't even register that typically.
Yeah. I will catch with a scope. My most common thing that I'll do is here's center, here's what I'm trying to aim at, right? And while you got that little bit of movement going on, I keep bottoming out in this area that's low and usually a little bit left. But then I try to adjust my aim up above, and then I can catch that going back to that low pocket. Because I find an area in that pattern where most of it's not a pattern. There's just a little bit of a wobble, but there's some parts of it where there's consistency, and I've always found low and slightly left, I kind of have a consistent plant I could find to where I could time that shot like that.
There was something I figured out that worked better for me on rifle team that I was mad I didn't figure this out to my senior year because I got way better scores my senior year than I had previously because of it. So the targets we shot at, they were civilian marksmanship program targets. They were the entire target. It was a 10-ring bullseye. It was about that big. It was, I think, an inch and a half in diameter or something like that. And the bullseye was a dot in the center of it. And then your diopter sights, we used pellet guns. Standing at, I think it was 10 meters, the diopter would be a little bit bigger than the bullet, or than the target. So there'd be, when you'd aim at it, you would see your bullseye, and you'd see the white paper around the bullseye, and then you'd see your front sight, because your front sight was a circular, diopter. And it was way harder for my brain to line up these two circles and to make sure there was an even amount of space around the bullseye. But I figured out if I get it to where the bullseye, if I sight in the gun to where it hits the bullseye, when the top of the target circle is touching the top of my sight circle, then I could get bullseyes way easy. Standing, kneeling, prone, didn't matter. It was just easier for my eyes, and mechanically it was easier for me to register, okay, now I need to break the shot.
You got one single focus area rather than capture that full circle.
It was just way easier to just make that target kiss the top of my front sight. And I was getting way better scores doing that than I ever did, just trying to line them up and concentrate on this whole space around the target and make sure it was perfectly centered. But yeah, again, it just comes down to do what works for you. Everybody's different, and there's some people who, Jerry Mitchell talked about this in one of his videos, and it always made me laugh. He said he knows world champion pistol shooters that fire their Glock and they wrap their finger around the front of the trigger guard.
Right. His daughter. She even does that. Like, she even started doing that, like 4 or 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Maybe longer.
I see it all the time in IDPA, IPSC, whatever. People who wrap that finger around and some who don't.
When I used to do grip work, I'd occasionally have people who wanted that, and I never had to do this front of the trigger guard for someone who was actually a solid shooter.
Mm-hmm.
It was always the newbies who were still doing the finger wrap up front.
I feel like it's a natural thing for a new person to want to do.
It is.
And a lot of people kind of get that, taught out of them because instructors don't like seeing that, but really it doesn't hurt anything.
I assume Lena did it because as a smaller stature person, if you're looking at what Jedi is teaching at Modern Samurai with controlling with that hand, she's able to keep that muzzle flip down by doing a hard pull with
further
that
out
finger
of the gun.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. It's the same reason why C-clamping a rifle became so popular, to go all the way out.
Yeah, it's funny when the Magpul Dynamics videos came out, Chris Costa, Travis Haley, and they were doing the really exaggerated C-clamps. Yeah. That was the first time I really saw kinesiology, or he calls it biomechanics or whatever fancy terminology Travis Haley likes to use.
Oh yeah, it's all about the doctor terms.
Which, they're not necessarily inaccurate, but it's just call it what it is. It's just kinesiology. That was the first time I'd seen that really implemented with, tactical guns for the most part. Prior to that, when I first started taking classes at APT, that was still the point where they were teaching people, they were like, well, when you hold up an AR, you may as well just grab the mag well, because if you're holding out here, your arm's going to get tired and you're eventually going to end up at the mag well.
What's funny is I do that. And if I got to take a long range shot unsupported and I'm standing, I go to the magwell, and it's because I can put this elbow
on
my
do too,
chest.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you, I did a building search that lasted 43, 47 minutes. Guess I should have just said 45. I like more specific numbers. But that building search, yeah, dude, I was on the magwell back here the whole time. Hold a rifle that long.
Exactly. There's a time and a place, exactly. It's, I'm not saying that the magwell grip or that there's anything wrong or that it's outdated, but there's a time and a place.
Right. Well, when it comes to, in a scenario like that, if there's a point where I gotta shoot, as soon as I can get out to C-clamp, once rounds start coming into the game, I'm going to. But I remember sitting on a porch one day with friends. One was a Marine officer, and the other guy was Australian Special Forces of sorts. I know he was attached to SAS as a combat engineer, but they were making fun of me over this. They weren't making fun of me. They said, no, nobody does that in real combat. They had both been out a couple of years, and obviously the civilian world is tip of the spear on that kind of stuff. Some guys who are CAG who probably aren't watching this, but if they are, might disagree with that. But a lot of this stuff comes from competition and all these civilian trainers. And look at Travis; he'll even talk about the Blackwater video where he's shooting dudes at the top. Where he's like, Jesus, it's a fucking turkey shoot. Yeah, he is, dude. If I had the knowledge that I had now and understood things like the level of power he could have put on the enemy that day would have been way more intense compared to what he did. It's just because that training's not there. The need for small group training, individual training on marksmanship to everything, it's crazy. Because I can take just about anybody who's not a good shot and cut their group into half or all the way down to a third in 2 hours. But then we're out here teaching 30 people at a time and nobody gets that attention. It's sad. I just wish we could see more of that for law enforcement and especially military.
I think that's part of the reason we treat teaching someone how to shoot like it's coming from a cookbook.
Yeah.
We just have set rules. We have set, everybody's got, instructors all have their phrases they love to use, or I know that I can think of a few just from joking at APT. He's got a lot of catchphrases for to make points about shooting to people. But yeah, everybody's different. If you want somebody to reach their true level of competency, there needs to be that understanding. We're going to get you to do the basics, but the only thing that is going to make you better is trigger time, is getting rounds downrange, training. I think the best case scenario for somebody is to actually get training from a variety of different instructors and get a bunch of different perspectives, and you can kind of pick and choose what you like from all those.
Yeah. This is slowly becoming an advertisement for aptacademy.com, but that's something that when I finally decided I wanted to try and get more well-rounded by going to see other instructors, that's what taught me what they literally are the best at, and that is mindset. And I didn't realize that most of the shooting schools out there, they're shooting schools. They're not gunfighter schools. And that's now I really appreciate what I didn't know, I didn't understand that I had, because that's kind of it's really where I started. I had gone through a police academy. Aside of that, I was trained by my grandpa, like shooting rodents or going deer hunting and, just shooting 22s plinking. And it was just the academy and that. And I remember our chief at the time, he took me out on the range, called me, got 100%. He's like, now you're a good shot, but don't go running your mouth talking about how good you are. We don't like people to do that. I was like, yeah, that's cool. I won't do that. And he's like, do you want to know what you suck at? And I was like, yes. He's like, so are you someone who can take advice, or are you going to get pissed at me? I was like, no, I want you to call anything I'm bad at because I want to be as good as I can be. And he's like, your mag changes suck. And I was like, okay, all I know about mag changes is indexing your finger on the front strap. He's like, okay, well, there's more to it. He starts walking me through it, and it's just awesome. We get back to the jail. I run into a captain. He's like, what'd you get? As the door opens, it's the chief, and I was at 100%. He's like, there you go, bragging. We're doing exactly he just asked me. You weren't part of that. Just an eye roll, whatever. He walks on past me. I'm like, this is going to be a great start. And then I was told by him, because he was one of the SWAT guys at the time. He's like, you need to go take a class at BJ. He'll know you're coming. And by the end of the class, I got an invite saying, hey, I don't know if Sheriff's going to allow it because you haven't been here long enough, but I want you to come try out for team. And at the time, I'd actually tied another guy for the youngest guy ever on team. And it was Josh, who was there, I think 7 to 10 years before I was. And to a point, it was cool. It's like I felt like he liked me and had a special interest in me because I was him. He was getting to see me, but then I think he didn't like it eventually. I felt like he got to where he just never really cared for me. It's whatever.
Going back to your comment about the gunfighter school versus a shooting school thing, I think that's where a lot of contention comes from, and why there's people who get so heated so quickly talking about shooting technique. Is there's different purposes to shooting. There's recreational, which is go as fast as possible or shoot as teeny tiny groups as possible, and then there's gunfighting. There's how to survive a gunfight, and it's not just about speed or just about precision. It's being fast and accurate. It's being fast but making sure you make your hits. You can't miss fast enough to survive a gunfight.
Yeah.
And I know probably everybody listening has heard that whole spiel before, but that really plays into the mindset of a lot of these instructors. Is some of them should not be advertising themselves, and I think a lot of them, to their credit, don't advertise themselves as self-defense instructors or that kind of narrative. They are like, if you want to learn how to shoot fast, come here. But they just don't come right out and say, I'm more useful for competition shooters.
Right. That's a really good point. And that's something the Jedlinski guy, Scott Jedlinski, what he's teaching, it's amazing. It's phenomenal, and it's crazy. And all these guys who are chasing the sub-second draw, got it, cool, I can do it, I can make the hit. But you know what it doesn't guarantee is a perfect grip on the gun. And what does is, again, what I learned at APT, you press down on the gun before you bring it up. But if you take the time to press down on your gun, you can't guarantee a sub-second draw and shoot. And there are elements to what he's teaching that he'll swear up and down is self-defense, talking about Jedi. It's not. It's competitive shooting. Can it be used? Can it be applied? Yes, just as the same as all the just gunfighter can be applied to competition. Sure. But there is a true time and place for each if you're trying to find the right correction. And there's in-between elements and things that I have adapted from Scott. But there are things that I have definitely left for the competition gaming crowd because that's overall what was being done.
Yeah, I think a competent shooter will take advice and take inspiration from both aspects.
Yep.
I'm not so far on the side of the gunfighter side of it that I refuse to use fine motor skills when I'm shooting. Pressing a mag release with my thumb instead of slapping the bolt paddle. I don't go that far, but I do respect the concept of muscle memory and repetitions being necessary for reliably operating a gun, even under stress. I just don't subscribe to the whole, you don't have fine motor skills when you're in a gunfight. I think that muscle memory applies even for fine motor skills. Pulling the trigger is a fine motor skill.
Yeah.
And so what would be the point of training your trigger pull at all if it wasn't going to be retained as soon as adrenaline hits?
some of the nuances of that and speech and everything. Muscles don't have memory. And, talking about what you're talking about with fine motor skills. Like, people think they don't understand what fine motor skills actually are and recognizing where those things come across. Then you have other agencies that are requiring a New York trigger that's like a 12-pound trigger pull. What's amazing about that is studies were done on this around 2012, and they've discovered that the fear reaction, sympathetic reaction, the jump scare or whatever, where negligent discharges were most common, the average male pulls up to 24 pounds of pressure. There's not a double action revolver that they wouldn't have pulled the trigger as well. So it's like the very thing they're trying to combat with a 12-pound trigger pull, you're not able to do. And then everyone's wondering how NYPD had 3 guys shoot at one guy who just killed his female boss, and I believe 7 bystanders got hit. First off, lack of training. In New York City, if your guys could drop to the knees, get low to the ground, fall to the ground, whatever, and shoot, shooting those shots up into the buildings, how many people do you think would have been hit? Versus the 7 on the street when you're just shooting across this busy street. And a great place to learn that tactic, you watch the movie Collateral with Tom Cruise, where he's in a club called El Rodeo, and he drops to the ground and smokes that dude in the chest and the head. That way he's not shooting through the crowd. Like, it was a perfect example. That movie, there's the alley scene where he shoots 2 guys, and the scene on the ground that I used to use in training and teaching law enforcement, and I've been to classes where people pull those scenes up. And I want to say it was an SAS guy that he trained with for a few weeks, all live fire and everything before that movie. So everything is just right there.
Well, yeah, going back to your comment about the sub-second draw. What stuck with me is one time I had a coworker, actually. I worked when I used to do security work, and I use that word very lightly because I guarded a car lot.
Nice.
But it was armed security.
Yeah.
We had to go do qualifications and all that. But one of my coworkers, we were talking about it, the sub-second draw. This is when T-Rex Arms was starting to get big. People were starting to recognize his name more and more.
Is that back when True Exodus was really big too on Instagram?
Oh God, True Exodus.
Because he was the one, he was giving out challenge coins if you could get, like, I think under 125 and then under 1 and then like maybe 9.9.
I had a buddy that was all about True Exodus back in the day.
His name started with a C and the last name started with a C?
No.
Okay, because I had one who was all into that.
No, he was a buddy of mine that you may have met him at some point, but anyway. Talking about that sub-second draw, well, my buddy he was my coworker at the time, I think he was an E7 in the Army. He was reserves, and so he was doing this security job as his full-time gig. But he said, a sub-second draw to me doesn't make any sense, because if shit's going down, you should have had your gun out 10 seconds ago, before, because you're not going to draw on a loaded gun that's pointed at you already.
Yeah, but I also think that's confirmation bias through selective incidents. It's the same reason before I got really into guns, I thought carrying on an ankle was good enough. But the problem is I had confirmation bias confirming that was okay, because I had kept envisioning the gas station robbery where I was a random shopper and was able to do a quiet draw from the back and save the day. And Steve Collins, Army Marksmanship unit guy, he's the one who got me to stop ankle carry when I had started working at a range at Bass Pro. And he said, I want to see you draw that when someone's shooting at you and you're running your ass across the parking lot trying to get to your gun. And I was like, damn.
Well, people fall for that same fallacy though with the sub-second draw. They have they envision somebody pulling a gun on them, or pulling a knife on them, and being far enough away that a second is going to be enough time to not die. And in the vast majority of cases where somebody's trying to draw on a loaded gun, they're losing that gunfight. Right. They're losing that knife fight. If that person's within 7 yards, then 9 times out of 10 they're losing that fight to a knife.
Yeah, I think that's called the 21-foot rule.
And so there's a balance there. It's like, yes, having a clean, efficient draw is important. I'm not saying that you should, or that anyone should slack off on, practicing their draw, but also at the same time, don't overemphasize it and don't expect it to compensate for poor situational awareness.
Right. Well, and you agree. And you definitely want to be able to work on that skill set, because especially studying law enforcement shooting videos, it's so common where you see a guy with a gun moving his body, to turn towards you before it's aimed at you. And in a lot of cases where that process takes up to 2, 3, 4 seconds even. So yeah, having a rapid
the recognition of a threat.
Yeah, you're winning the game with that. But then also, like, I mean, we can get into so many different details here. A lot of people say keep your gun hand free. I don't. I carry my grocery bag. If I just go to Walmart or Target or whatever, I carry it in my gun hand. And the reason is I want my garment grabber free. And then my bag, this is all confirmation bias because of what I programmed in my head, it's, oh, I'm being stuck up, held up, whatever the guy said. Literally, instantly, bag in their face, off the X, gun up, boom. Like, that's what I perceive happening. But it's so interesting, you know, the different methods there. And then what's the reality I'm actually going to draw my gun in that scenario? Because I've had a few friends where they've been in that situation, one of which was after some hurricane relief on one of the islands 4 or 5 years ago. And he had his wife flown in, and they were hanging out and shopping, and all of a sudden, as they're walking back to their Jeep, there's 2 dudes with guns in their faces, him and the other guy. And they're both former Blackwater contractors who are there doing contract security, great paying, awesome gig kind of a thing. And yeah, they literally were robbed of their vehicle right in front of their wives while they're these badass security guys, you know, and they stole their vehicle and their pistols were in the vehicle, so they also stole their guns. It's like, whoa. And it's like, well, what did you, he's like, it's like, I'm not judging you, man. I'm wanting to hear what everything going on in your head so I have a better perception of the reality when it happens to me. Because we all like to think, oh, we're going to be the big hoss, you know, that comes in strong, saves the day, and prays to God, please surveillance camera so I can become a nationally recognized trainer.
I think every high school male has that fantasy of like, what if a school shooter came in the door now? What am I going to do? It's like, the reality is you're not going to do anything probably. I mean,
grab the front of the AK-47, stab him in the face with a pin, and then shoot him on the ground.
Yeah, just that main character fallacy that people fall into.
Yep. And what's funny, again, something about Steve's point made me realize that I, for some reason, the one that I picked constantly was a gas station being held up with the dudes coming with guns pointing at the cash registers, and they may not have. I see the commotion because I pay attention to situational awareness, and I drop down, get my gun, find that advantageous position to be in, and call them out, and I guess smoke them as soon as they turn around.
And the thing is, if it had been exactly that scenario, that may have worked out really well for you, but change one little aspect of that, change which side you're facing them from, or maybe they're behind you in line instead of in front of you, or, you know.
You said change one little thing. The most fascinating part about that is almost every single shooting where I know someone who's been in a shooting, there's been a twist that they've never thought of, never trained for, that threw a wrench in things. One specifically, at least one, sometimes more. But there's always just something weird like that. I mean, I got known as a flashlight guy because one of my first nights, we had a guy who his pursuit, wrecked out vehicle and everything, and I ended up losing my flashlight in the car, having to shut the door as another squad car's flying past me, and then all I had was the original Streamlight MicroStream, which is only 18 lumens, the original. It was up here on the little lapel thing, and I pulled that off, and as I scanned into the woods, and a gunshot goes off, and the woods are a 2-dimensional wall because that light doesn't have the light to penetrate through it. And there was a ride along where I yelled for that guy to give me his light. He tosses at me, and I throw my MicroStream at him and go off into these woods. Now, assuming that my captain just got shot, turned out my captain actually had a negligent discharge falling off of the hood of the guy's car when the guy took off running. And Matt was the guy who was ride along, who ended up being a cop shortly after that. But he said, dude, I was terrified out there because we had shots fired. I had another MicroStream. I got both of them things. Just looking around trying to find something. But that was crazy.
You know, I mean, speaking of like calls at work, obviously different kind of scenario, EMS versus LE, but you know, we can train and study our protocols and worship our protocols as much as possible, and we're still going to run into calls where we're like, I don't know what to do, and even if I call my medical director right now and ask what should I do for this situation, they'll just gonna be like, figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
The one that always comes to my mind is years ago I had this call for it was a individual who had they were in a bucket lift working on a transformer, up on a power lines, and had electrocuted themselves. And in the process of electrocuting themselves, somehow had the fire department was trying to tell us that he fried the controls for the bucket lift, so we couldn't lower him down to the ground. And I don't know if that's like feasible, if that can actually happen. You would think that couldn't actually happen, but I don't know. All I know is the controls didn't work to lower this bucket lift down to the ground. We had a guy in cardiac arrest 50 feet up in the air. And I'm like, what do I even do here? And it's just worst case scenario, the family's there, they're getting really agitated that we can't do anything to get the guy down. We're like, well, we can't go up there, we're going to get electrocuted too. We had to wait for the electric company to turn off the power to that, and then fire had to bring in a ladder truck to get up to him, and it was a huge mess. And that was just one of those calls where it's like, I didn't wake up that morning expecting to have that many setbacks to something as simple as making patient contact. Like 99.9% of my calls, it doesn't matter what state my patient is in, I can walk up to them and touch them. And with that call, I just couldn't.
Yeah, that's a heck of a wrench.
Yeah, and I don't know any amount of critical thinking that would have fixed that. Because when it comes down to it, it just wouldn't have been safe to go up there and get the guy.
Yeah, no, and if it fried the controls, I'd be afraid to touch any metal component of the tractor, assuming that maybe something's still getting through it.
And so, like, overall, my point being, like, or I guess what I'm getting at is I talk to other coworkers after the fact who they're like, oh, well, I would have done this or I would have done that. And I just know for a fact that not a single one of their suggestions were feasible or realistic or would have been possible. So but they're convinced that if they were there, things would have been different. And people just have that natural inclination to, they have main character syndrome. I think, well, if I was there, I wouldn't have let things go that way. And it's like, well, you wouldn't have really had a choice.
It's like hearing the armchair quarterbacking when people are sitting in their house wondering why a professional athlete went left when he should have gone right and how they would have gone right. I'm like, okay.
Well, and to be fair, to work in EMS, you have to be a little narcissistic to begin with. I work with some really, really great people, but you have to be comfortable with the fact that you are there to save people's lives. And if you're not comfortable with that fact, if you're not confident in the fact that you have the ability to save someone's life, you really shouldn't be doing the job.
That makes sense.
I mean, it's narcissism, but it's like a good kind of narcissism.
There's certain things you need to have confident control with whoever is owning the situation, running it. And without that, it's terrifying.
If my family member is being transported by an ambulance crew, I want that ambulance crew to be the ones who brag about being the best.
Right.
And who are, not necessarily brag, but the ones who are the most confident in their skills.
Right.
I don't want the guys that are like, oh, should I do this or should I do that? Should I give this medication? I'm going to call the medical director and, ask him for something that I should already know.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
When we were doing the construction here, setting up the room, one of the guys fell off a ladder and broke his hip. And the EMS crew that showed up, I wouldn't want doing anything on me. It was terrifying, and hearing this lady ask for confirmation on numbers before she's loading them up with morphine or whatever, and just not quite sure of herself, and then asking like a third time, I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, like the dosage is what.
Yeah.
We literally have an app on our phone that you punch in the patient's demographic,
which the other person was using because they saw the phone up.
Yeah, no, it's just. There are people in EMS that they're good-hearted people and they want to help, but there's just certain types of competency you need for it, and not everybody is cut out for the job. And that's not to be like...
That's every occupation.
Yeah, that's literally every occupation. Some people, although they could do the job, they would be physically capable of it, just aren't a good fit for it.
Right.
And I applaud that they, even try, but once they figure out, like, oh, if I stay in this, I'm going to kill somebody, that's when they should be making their exit. As unfortunate as that is. It takes a certain level of narcissism and just competence and just a mix of book smarts and common sense that a lot of people don't have one or both of.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like every occupation, again, it's like I've had doctors that are uncertain of themselves, and I'm like, you're the one who's supposed to be leading this thing, tell me what I need to do. So, like, and I don't like you. I know you Google things, but I don't want to hear you say you just Googled blah, 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 and this is what they're saying. What? You're kidding?
Well, if they need to use WebMD to like just organize stuff in their head, I get that. Because a lot of people give doctors a hard time because they do reference resources a lot. But if you need to reference like very specific things like dosages or indicators or contraindicators for drugs or different interventions, if you just need something that can, double check you, I get that. But if you don't have like a level of competency to support all of that, and you're just relying entirely on a machine to do your job for you, then yeah, that's not the doctor I'd want to go to.
Yeah. With a compare and contrast here, falsehood that I guess I didn't understand getting into law enforcement was the fact that I thought I was getting it to help people. And there's two sides to that. There are people that you're helping, and then there's people who keep putting themselves in shitty situations because they're complete morons. And I found that probably over 90% of the job was that. How's that for EMT?
More or less the same. So, everybody has this vision of what our job is like as we're spending all day, doing CPR on people or, rushing people to the hospital after a car accident, stuff that's, very critical calls, very Hollywood calls, and the vast minority of our calls are that.
Yeah.
Like, I can count on one hand the number of gunshot wounds that I've taken to the hospital in the past 3 years. It just doesn't happen that often. I can count on two hands the number of critical patients from car wrecks I've taken in the past couple of years. It's just not as often as people would think. The normal day-to-day call is it's two things. It's one, old people.
Yeah.
And that's just a part of the job.
Right.
People can't help getting old, but what they can help is getting things like COPD, diabetes, congestive heart failure, all these conditions that are completely preventable. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I'm obviously not in shape and the healthiest person on the planet, but we'll take the same person to the hospital 3 times a week because they have terminal COPD and they refuse to stop smoking.
Right.
And that is, those people that fall into that category of just willfully just killing themselves slowly, those make up 90% of our calls.
And if you were to split that versus use of strong drugs, how would that split look? From people of that versus people heroin, fentanyl.
Oh, like overdoses and stuff. Oh, even overdoses, those are more exciting than what we normally get. I mean, we do get more of those than we get like the really traumatic or like dramatic traumas and stuff like that. The Hollywood calls. We get more overdoses than those, but even those, it's like, if I actually get to, stop somebody who is going to die if I don't intervene, then that's neat.
Yeah.
That's a call I actually remember for a little while afterwards. But what I don't remember is the guy that I've taken to the hospital for the 40th time this year.
Yeah.
Because he has type 1 diabetes and just doesn't manage his condition at all and doesn't care to, because he knows that if his blood sugar drops, then the ambulance is going to show up and make him all better.
Right.
And we get that from a shocking number of people.
I'm going to say something I probably shouldn't say for the whole world to hear, but I think it's hilarious, and I'm not going to say where this took place, but I know of a law enforcement squad who deals with their regular people that they can't stand typically, that are homeless, that are a consistent issue that they see, like you said, 3 times, sometimes 5 times a week. That's meaning twice a night, twice a week, and they would pool cash together and tell them, the deal is you can't ever come back, but you pick a city and we're all chipping in and buying you a bus ticket. Don't ever come back.
I think that's literally a South Park episode.
Is it really?
There's a South Park episode where the homeless people come to South Park and they get them all on a bus and they take them to like San Francisco or something. Because awesome. They're talking about how great the homeless are treated in San Francisco.
Well, I had this told to me by a friend, and It's just amazing. And I was like, well, how often do you do this? It's like, oh, we've done it probably 3-4 times this year. And I was like, that's crazy. And then I see the mayor of Austin go on Joe Rogan's show, and he starts talking about LA was accusing him of bussing out homeless.
Yep.
And he's like, we've never done that. We don't do that. And I'm sitting here laughing, thinking it's probably cops, maybe EMTs as well, who are getting sick of the people who are just annoyingly always taking up your time and taking you from situations or
Taking up
delaying
resources.
you. Yeah.
So I can say I've never done that. That is hilarious.
But yeah, you get that one that just won't stop annoying. And if they're going to take you up on it, I could see how that would just be an easy thing. And where you'd pay money out of your own pocket, to just make the problem go away and become somebody else's issue.
There's some that do, as far as like the homeless population goes, there's some that are kind of a problem that fixes itself, because a lot of them just want to get to Springfield, get to the nearest big city.
Yep.
And I do not work in Springfield, thank God.
So they're wanting a ride.
Yeah, they're just literally just wanting a ride. They'll make up some BS complaint, and it's not uncommon that on the way to the hospital they'll be asking me, "Hey, where's the nearest liquor store? Where's the nearest gas station to the hospital when we get there?" And before I'm even done checking them in, because patients like that almost always go to the waiting room. I'll be checking them in with the triage nurse at the waiting room. This patient will be leaving, walking out the front door and looking for the nearest liquor store. And, I did my job. I did everything that I was expected to do, knowing full well that this guy was just wasting our time, but I'm still obligated to, transport anybody who wants to go to the hospital to the hospital. The only time EMTs get to tell somebody, no, I'm not taking you to the hospital, is if there's like a natural disaster. Like I've talked to paramedics who worked Hurricane Katrina, disaster relief, like immediately following the hurricane. Cox sent several ambulances down there, several crews down there to just assist with the mass number of casualties they had. And the deal was you would respond to 911 calls and also just drive around and look for people who needed help.
Right.
And if you responded to a call for somebody that was not critical and had the ability to get to the hospital on their own, did not need medical intervention, you could tell them, no, I'm not taking you to the hospital, find your own way there. And I really, really envy that, because nothing drives me more crazy than when I pull up to somebody's house and there's like 5 cars in the driveway. I go in, there's a bunch of driving age adults in the house, and they're like, oh yeah, so-and-so hasn't been feeling well today. And it's like, okay, well, why didn't one of you guys drive them? And they're all under the impression that if they go by ambulance, they won't have to go to the waiting room. That is not true.
No.
Our helicopter has taken people to the waiting room before. Which, can you imagine getting a $20,000 bill for a helicopter ride to the hospital and then going to the waiting room?
That's nuts.
It has happened. It has happened to people, and they are very upset when it happens.
Yeah.
An ambulance and a helicopter are not a golden ticket to getting a room in the ER. For anybody at home who thought that was the case, it is not.
Have you been in the chopper at all?
I have ridden in a helicopter, but not the EMS helicopter. I guess they actually have bigger ones now that could accommodate somebody my size. There's still a maximum height, though, for people who actually work full-time on it.
Gotcha.
Like, it can accommodate patients my size.
Right.
But the crew that works on it, I think it's like 6'3" or 6'4" is the maximum. And there's also a weight limit, because they have to account for fuel and all of that, and I definitely exceed the weight limit. For people at home who can't tell, I'm a large human being. I'm 6'8", and I weigh a lot. I won't get too specific, but the helicopter can accommodate patients like me, but I'll never ride in it unless I'm a patient, which hopefully never happens.
What are your thoughts on Narcan being over the counter? Is it a recent change?
Yeah, obviously it's kind of a torn. It's a divisive thing, because on the one hand you have people who are going to be empowered by the fact that, oh, well, I have Narcan, so I can do whatever, and I can use as much heroin as I want, and as long as my buddy doesn't OD before me, he can hit me with Narcan. But then you also have times where it genuinely will save somebody's life. So it's done with the best of intentions, I think, is the best way I can rationalize it. It's done with good intentions, but no matter what, it's going to have negative effects. just as not making Narcan easily available would have negative effects for some people.
Yeah.
I guess I'm in the middle on it. I think you're just changing who is going to die from an overdose, but not how many are going to die, I think.
That makes sense. Which way do you see being worse in the end?
Oh man,
It's just tough to decide what is worse in that scenario.
There's no way of knowing. The nature of addiction is scary, and my initial impulse is to say that empowering addicts is going to hurt them in the long run.
And you'll probably create some people who were afraid of it who have less fear now and might try it.
Yeah, I definitely see that aspect of it. But
I hadn't even thought about that till now.
Narcan on its own, though, is not a dangerous drug. It's not something people are going to get high off of or abuse.
Right.
It's literally just to take away a high. And so it's like there's that aspect of it's not dangerous to put Narcan out there inherently because it's not like people are going to abuse it. It's not like Benadryl or Sudafed or something. But
can you misdiagnose and hurt somebody with Narcan?
No.
Okay. That was the original talks in law enforcement. I couldn't even remember what it was, but there's a patient who's doing X, hitting them with Narcan actually creates this problem, but I don't even remember what that was.
I'm sure somebody out there will have a patient in a case study that had Narcan that ultimately was thought to decrease their outcome. Personally, I have never encountered a situation where Narcan, I think, would have been contraindicated. It's kind of like, because sometimes there's like a meme among EMS people that law enforcement show up and there's a diabetic patient whose blood sugar is low and they hit them with Narcan because the symptoms are very similar between hypoglycemia and...
That's probably what I'm thinking of then.
Yeah, that's a meme amongst EMS people is like this policeman standing all proud with like the Superman symbol on his chest.
Yeah.
It's like your local PD Narcaning your diabetic patient. So I think that's more of the danger of Narcan is, assuming that you hit them with it and then that's all you have to do. I mean, you still have to provide supportive care for these people and check all your boxes. Make sure it's not a blood sugar issue. Make sure it's not a stroke or anything else that can mimic those kind of symptoms.
Right.
It's... obviously, if somebody's a known drug addict, chances are, if they're suddenly unresponsive and have shallow or absent breathing, safe to say, it's probably heroin, but... You never know. I've been surprised a couple of times. We'll be doing CPR on somebody and think it's one thing, and then I take their blood sugar, which is part of the process for a cardiac arrest, protocol, is that sometime quickly get a blood sugar, and there's been a couple of times where I've been like, oh, holy crap, their blood sugar is 7. And, that's an easy fix. That's something we can fix right there at their house typically.
Right.
So sometimes it catches you off guard, or what happens more often than not that catches me off guard or surprises me is we'll actually get our patient outcomes, which this is in contrast to when I first started working in EMS. We rarely found out what actually happened to our patients after we dropped them off at the hospital. Now we can go into an online portal and we can see everything the doctor did,
That's awesome.
Prescribe the doctor's notes.
Do you like looking at especially vitals, certain specific people?
Yeah, I don't do it for every patient because the lady I took in for a stubbed toe, I don't care what happened to her, but. If I take in a cool call or just something that really stumped us where we're like, well, I don't know if it was a stroke or if it was this or that. I like to go back and look, and there's been a lot of times where I'm like, it's been something completely different where I'm thinking somebody's having a stroke and they're actually septic.
Well, and paying attention to that seems like that's going to help you diagnose issues big time.
It'll help us grow and just learn to think and check off all the boxes.
Yeah.
Doing a differential on a patient, you start off with all of the possible things that could be wrong with them, and you may have one that you're like, I'm 99% sure it's this. You still have to exclude everything else it could be. That's why you do things like take a blood sugar, get their medical history, make sure that they don't have a history of any of those other possibilities.
Collect all the clues.
Yeah. And so you start with every possibility and narrow it down. Doctors do the same thing in differential diagnosis. That's all that means is it's process of elimination, essentially.
That's a big thing. Had somebody ask me recently about death investigations and what's the likelihood, especially in smaller areas, of people getting away with stuff. And it's like, what's very likely. It took I was trained to teach everything as a homicide first thing and prove it otherwise, in time when you can't prove that it is a homicide. But without that initial conversation, I didn't see a death investigation like that at all, And then once that was put into my head, it really changed perspective, and it also made me wonder, oh my gosh, how many things that are foul play that have just, there's no major clues here. Cool, accidental death, who knows? And move on.
Right.
And especially like when I started and some of the smaller places I've worked, I mean, it's just been that, where there isn't enough. You're never even going to get the evidence you need to discover the foul play in the first place. It's wild how much of that's still alive today.
I've gotten some calls where I was very suspicious of the circumstances, where I show up and, our call notes will say this person's girlfriend called it in, said that her boyfriend shot himself, he committed suicide, and, he is still breathing though. Oh, it's crazy how a lot of times people who shoot themselves in the head are still breathing when they get there because the brainstem is still intact.
Yep.
Hopefully this isn't too PG-13 for.
I'm not too worried about it.
So, I've had that happen multiple times though. But this one call, we show up and this girlfriend nowhere to be seen when we show up, and also the guy only had what we could see was one bullet hole in the back of the head.
Oh gosh.
And we're like, oh, this is a murder. Like we're already sheriffs were already there, and we were trying to kind of indicate that to them, like, you may want to go track down that caller because this seems fishy. Well, it turns out the guy had shot himself in the mouth. We couldn't see the entry hole, and what we were seeing on the back was the exit hole. But it still doesn't explain why she was not there when we got there, and why she just bailed. Apparently, she went to like a friend's house or something, and people just act in weird ways under stressful situations like that. I could actually remember I was a little kid. I was staying at my best friend's house, and his little sister, who was probably 4 at the time, she reached up on top of the TV stand to grab a candle that was up there, a lit candle, and she's a little short thing, and the TV stand's up here. She grabs it and tilts it back and gets hot candle wax right in her eye. And, it looked horrible, and she was screaming and in a ton of pain. Grand scheme of things, she had a burned cornea. It healed just fine.
Wow.
She's totally fine. But when that happened, as soon as I saw that there was, like, a medical emergency going on right in front of my eyes, like seeing somebody with burning candle wax in their eye, I said, this is how I reacted as a little kid. I was like, I don't want to be in this house right now. I don't want to witness any of this. And I just went and stood in the driveway. And as the paramedics pulled in, I was like, hey guys, how's it going? And I was just like, I blocked it out of my mind. I was like, I'm going to stand in the driveway and pretend that what's happening in the house right now is not happening.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy how it works. I remember in high school, some kids that were 16, 17 years old were playing a prank on some other kids who'd just gone out on a hunting trip, going turkey hunting, shotgun involved. Negligent discharge takes place. Well, while they're waiting for the prank element to take place, they're video recording. And I'm probably throwing these guys under the bus onto this, but I assume by now they had conversations about it. But they had it on camera. One kid unloading, negligent discharging through the windshield of the car. Ultimately, they just peppered the kid in a lot of places, face and chest and everything. He was released from the hospital probably 45 minutes, hour and a half. Like, he didn't have to be there long because things barely went in after going through the windshield. But they were terrified and afraid of who knows what, and they had quietly left the area, went and got in cars, drove away, pulled up the tape, put the cover on it, just recorded black to cover up the tape so it doesn't exist anymore. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, man, I bet that kid who got shot would love to have that tape, and they just recorded right over it. But yeah, that's more that kid mentality. I also remember a study on one. It was a kid, this one's kind of dark, but kid's 6 years old. He's told by his uncle not to play with this .22 rifle. Don't ever touch that. Don't ever touch that. Well, one thing we teach is you kill curiosity by always saying yes when somebody wants to see a gun, right? So no matter what, if one of my kids says, hey, can I see your gun? Yeah. So we discuss how we're unloading it, why we're unloading it, where to look. And then and they're going to be done 2 or 3 minutes anyway. So even if we're busy, it doesn't matter. Always stop and say yes.
It's making it taboo that makes it interesting.
Yes. So this guy made it taboo by saying no, and this kid is playing with this rifle, and he hears his uncle open the front door. And he's scared to death at how much trouble he's going to get in. Scared, just completely terrified. So he goes ahead and moves back a little ways away from the door, and when his uncle came through the door, he shot him and killed him. With a .22 rifle. Yeah. He was so afraid of the ass whooping, the chewing, whatever was going to go on, he actually shot and killed his uncle as a 6-year-old kid.
That's like some primal instinct shit.
Right.
Man, that's insane. Yeah, people act in the weirdest ways under duress like that.
Mm-hmm.
Just ways that make no sense and, never will make sense.
Yeah.
You can't rationalize irrational thought process.
Right. Well, dude, yeah, so we're obviously friends. It's easy for us to get off topic and talk about other things. I want to jump back to clones. Obviously, in not being a real cloner, I want to know more about it and why people do it and all that. Because, again, I like certain time-specific areas, but I'm not really chasing a specific clone. Probably the most interesting one, I think, is the Gordon rifle. I think that's fascinating how much that's been cloned. But there's a stigma around cloners as wannabes, right? What's your take on that?
So a lot of people make the mistake of, when they see somebody replicating a service weapon, they think that they're trying to emulate the person carrying the weapon, when in reality, some clones may be attributed to specific individuals, like the Gordon carbine. There's other examples where, they want to copy this exact rifle. Kyle Lamb, Viking Tactics, people clone one of his rifles. He had an old school, it was a Colt 733 or 723, had an Armalite carbon fiber handguard. It was a really cool, late 90s, early 2000s build from before the time of even Picatinny being really standard. But they make the mistake of thinking, I'm trying to emulate Kyle Lamb or I'm trying to emulate Gordon, when that's not what it is. I just like the gun. I like the history and the mindset, the development, the details. It scratches an itch for me. And cloners, there's a few reasons people do it, but I think the majority of us, it's just because we see a cool picture of a gun online and it just does something for us to recreate that gun in real life with, the correct parts. There's there's a community to it too. ARFCOM is notorious for having threads for basically every clone out there. That's where I came across this rifle, the Naval Special Warfare Recce rifle, as they call it. There's different variants of this gun. This one's based off of one that was seen in use around, I think, 2014. And there's a community to it. One guy will post some, the photos, and then everybody else will start posting, okay, well, what's this part? What's this part? You'll put together kind of the parts list, and then people will actually start trying to build these things.
Yeah.
Recently, that's happened with Navy SEALs have been seen with these Noveske carbines, actually. They're 10.5-inch, 5.56 and 300 blackout carbines. And they've kind of a cool build list, and they're all tan, just neat-looking rifles. But when photos first came out of them, riding around in helicopters with these guns slung up at, in front of them, people were like, what the hell is this? Is this something I can just go buy? Or through the just process of everyone collaborating, they figured out what all the parts were, and there's a build list for those guns now, and people kind of, they seek out those parts. Stuff like the receivers and the handguards have gotten really hard to find because cloners have sought those out specifically. But it's kind of, for some people, it's the desire to get in on something before it's cool.
Yeah.
For me, it's the desire to have something cool that's not going to change ever. I'm not going to be constantly chasing that newest, latest, and greatest, lightest, fastest, whatever.
That's interesting, because I have an M9A4, and I've always loved the nostalgia around the 92FS and 9. And then the A1 finally, having the under rail, and they actually opened up the mag well a tiny bit. I'd usually cut them open even more. But I got the M9A4 thinking it would, as you've put it a lot, scratch the itch, and it didn't, because I want that 90s nostalgia. And so, and it's like, I'm not ever going to put a light on this gun. I do on that one, because it's a great suppressor host. But I want to get just the classic 92FS. And that's interesting, because I'm into that gun, technically for the clone logic.
Yeah.
And the other thing you've made me recognize already in this conversation is I was a huge MP5 guy through all the 90s movies, and my favorite setup is your standard MP5 with the suppressor attached on a 3-lug, not the SD style. Mm-hmm. And I love the telescoping stock. Mm-hmm. But when I finally went through MP5 training, I hate the telescoping stock because there's extra jiggle in the gun when you're shooting full auto.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yes, and I became a fanboy of the fixed one. Mm-hmm. And it's like, so I'm all about the fixed stock. And it's funny because I kept hearing guys on team dogging the collapsible one, because they look so cool. And then you go shoot the two. I was like, okay.
And then you get it. Yeah, it's
that would go great with inferior rifles right there.
Exactly.
That's the element of that.
That's the whole namesake is like were I to build an MP5 clone, which I'm actually looking into it. I would do the SD because that's the one that DevGru used for a long time. A lot of my guns are DevGru clones. This one is, that one is. Mark 18's a Marsoc clone, but I would do the MP5 SD with the collapsing stock because that's typically how they set them up. And it's not because it's the most comfortable or the most practical, it's just the most iconic. I think that guns, specifically clones, but just guns in general, when you talk about ones that are iconic, movie guns, video game guns, people want what was cool when they were younger or what was cool when they first got into the hobby.
That's where the collector's cars are the same way. It's so many people.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a coincidence that old guys like old Corvettes and young guys like me drive newer Mustangs. And
I've done security at a toy collecting convention called ICCC in Nashville. It'll be coming up this fall in October. Same thing. A lot of the crowd, it's like 35 to 55-year-olds who are collecting the toys that they loved as a kid.
Exactly. It's just a matter of everybody wants what was cool when they were younger. And for me, that specific, this is going back to when I first got into Airsoft, what was currently being issued when I got into Airsoft and when I first started taking notice of the whole hobby of cloning and when I was looking at pictures of service weapons all day instead of studying like I should have been. Block 2 stuff was big back then. The Block 2, being the M4 Block 2 or the Mark 18 Block 2, using the Daniel Defense rail and, all the cool tan accessories. That was the workhorse back when I got into it. And if you were a cloner and you didn't have at least a couple Block 2 builds, then what are you even doing, The Mark 12, that's another one super iconic because of movies like Lone Survivor, and just there's tons and tons of photos of them being used. They were used for a long time, and they've got this cool whole program that was used to develop this rifle with all these fun little trivia facts that go along with it, and it's fun to learn about. Do you know the reason why they went with 18 inches on the Mark 12 barrel? I'm asking this because you used to have a Mark 12.
I don't.
So the reason was they were originally going to go with 20 inches, and Big Army told them, you can't do 20 inches, you already have 20-inch guns, you have M16s.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
So you need to pick a different barrel length because that's redundant. And they're like, okay, well, what about 18? And they're like, okay, that is now a different...
I was at Knight's Armament with some PJs, and they were talking about when they were doing new uniforms, they put in for Cry. Mm-hmm. And they were, no, we're not buying Cry. Because they all know Cry, they know the price of Cry, you're not getting Cry. And they're like, okay, Arc'teryx. And they're like, that's fine.
Which is
but it was
more expensive.
It was cheaper. Mm-hmm. And they were okay with, even though it was still higher grade than they technically, do we really need that standard? Probably not, especially at the rate that guys can just switch out uniforms and everything. And also, if you look into the Cry Precision pants, when Marines, Marsoc that went to Cry in the Woodland, have you seen those?
Cries, yes.
Do you know the problem about those?
Huh.
So the crotch blows out on them. Mm-hmm. And it's because the price wasn't at an agreeable rate for the Marines to say yes, and they asked them to cut certain corners and where they do, and they went to a cheaper stitching on it. And so when you see those, if they're used, pretty bad, you don't want them. But if they look minty, go for it. But you're going to blow out the crotch, and I think around the knee pad areas, there's some issues with the stitching too. So, and I'm a huge Woodland guy. When I got on team, we were all in Woodland, and I didn't care for Woodland until then, but I became obsessed after that. And so when I saw the Marines had those pants, I was stoked. And so I guess there I was doing clone style research on these pants because I wanted Cries in Woodland, but not after hearing that.
And I think everybody at least has the desire to clone something out there. Maybe a gun from a video game. I've got a buddy who clones all the guns from Far Cry, which seems like a weird choice for me, but he loves it. I mean, he's cloned guns also from like Grand Theft Auto. Like, there's a weird 416 setup in GTA 5. It's got a Daniel Defense rail.
Oh my gosh, he's going through and doing that?
Yeah, he never did find the Daniel Defense rail, but he started that build.
There's a guy, I think he calls it the Infernus, or GTA Infernus, Instagram handle. I'll try and put it in here if I can find it. He's building the Inferno or Infernus, the Lamborghini looking car from Grand Theft Auto 5. Yeah. And like, I just ran across it doing the random feed, but I follow the guy now, and and he's got that weird little 4-pipe and a diamond pattern exhaust coming out the back, and he's got some of the body work done on it, but it's a working driving car now. He's just got to be finishing up the body on it.
You know, another aspect of cloning I haven't even touched on, but a lot of cloners actually are previous or current service members who want to clone their own gun they carried overseas. Right. A buddy of mine who was field artillery in the Army, he asked for my help to build an M4A1 just like the one. He still had parts from when he left. He had some magazines, a grip pod, and some other like little bits and pieces. And he wanted me to help him clone his service weapon, and I found him the same exact aim point, the Comp M2, M68 RCO, the same mount, the same barrel, rail. Like, I sold him half of these parts because I just had them laying around. And he's got literally his old service weapon just without the fun switch.
That's awesome. Yeah, just about everybody I know who's big into guns has built their old service weapon. And that's one thing, the closest thing I have now is a Bushmaster that's really similar to my first, which is a Rock River. But I ought to go back and build that. And with all the parts I used to have it, I even had the foregrip right here in front of the magwell.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's just like the things where you look back and you're like, oh no, I was that guy.
I used to be the guy who would buy 2 different colors of the Magpul XTM rail covers.
That's what I had.
I would do the...
Yes. Yeah. So I had the black...
alternating.
Yeah, black foliage, tan, and olive. I think it was all 4 of those that I had, and I had created the camo pattern. You know, it's because they told us to paint our rifles. I'm like, I've got this very high-end Rock River rifle. You know, so shoot, I paid $1,400 for it. Like, they were up there then.
Nowadays, they'll get you a Daniel Defense.
Yeah. And rifles were also hard to come by at that time. But I had decked that thing out with camo features. Like, I had the rubber overmolded Hogue finger groove grip. Does that one have a Rock River logo on it? Am I crazy? No, it's a Hogue grip.
Just a Hogue.
Yeah. So it's, that grip.
It's that grip, though, yeah.
Yep. But I bought the one that was tan. And if you get that one, it's almost like plastic impregnated looking where there's swirls in the tan. It's like, that's even cooler for camo. I had a CTR stock in olive drab, and then those panels out front. And I had one of the coolest things that I think a lot of people are excited about when I tell them this. I told you about how I lost my light, right? And I had the little worthless one. Well, I had lights on every gun, and I had 4 lights in my squad car after that. It's like, I will never be in that situation. The saying is 2 is 1, 1 is none.
Right.
I always say 3 is 1. Because I learned that, and I had to. But the second one was worthless, right? So, with that concept, I took a micro stream. I still have it. I'll show you that after this. But the an original micro stream, clipped it to a ladder rail cover, and then stuck the ladder rail cover on the bottom. And it never came off. We talk about certain parts being inferior and things like that. The first time we ever raided a house, I was going through this small trailer door after searching the outbuilding, and as I go in, I bumped my rifle pretty hard on that frame on this trailer. It's like a camper trailer, and the frame is tiny, like how a dude my size, even I'm 6'1", I'm not huge, but add kit to it, like getting through these tiny little... It's like, if you ever been in a Humvee? Yeah, and trying to step in and out of that, especially at a chest rig and boots on, it's like, why these doors need to be bigger. It's insane. But it was a Midwest Industries rear sight that was aluminum, and that thing hit and came back to here, and I couldn't physically knock it up if I wanted to, which I never knew it was down like this. Like, in the heat of the moment, looking over my sights and everything after that, which that was the last thing I did, was just going in that trailer. I had never actually noticed until I got home that my sight was back, and I went to push it. It had sheared the aluminum where the release button is on that to drop it down, and it was lodged. I had to take a mallet to it to knock it back up straight. And it would then, at that point, it was straight or 45 only, because the aluminum had created a block for it to go all the way down. But like, that was wild, just a wake up call of just how you can be harsher on gear without even noticing it.
Oh yeah, I mean, everything has its limits, and you'd be surprised at. I mean, well, you probably wouldn't, but people would be surprised in general at some of the stuff that's broken over the years, just inexplicably, or in situations where you wouldn't think.
Oh yeah.
One example that comes to mind: a buddy of mine has the same charging handle that I have on this gun. It's a PRI gas buster charging handle, old school. I put them on all my guns for the most part because I run all them.
How much do those go for now?
Like $84, I think, is what they is like retail. But
Charlie Delta, Courtney, I want to apologize to you now for costing you all that money. He came in and was working at my shop and had one of those, and I made fun of it, and I said, I'm going to get you a BCM, but you're going to do me a favor, and you're going to throw that one in the trash can.
Just because they're old school, and they work for, as far as actual gas reduction to the face, they do work.
Yeah, but well, back then, they weren't going for anything. It was like, because military bought a ton of them, right? And like, guys had those. And so yeah, I was like, throw that in the trash. I'm gonna upgrade you to this, and that's probably actually better.
I will say the latch on the original one, like I've got here, if it wasn't for the fact that that's the only one that was ever issued, I wouldn't use it, because the one that has the serrations on it, the serrations make so much of a difference. When you go to rack this one, there's sometimes your finger will slip off because it's so slippery.
Okay,
it's so slippery. Sometimes
wow,
it'll come off and you'll just punch yourself right in the jaw or in the chest. But a buddy of mine, he bought one of those brand new out of the package and went to rack it for the first time. The roll pin that holds on the latch sheared. Yeah. And just completely came off. Now, the gun's still functional at that point, but the charging handle did break.
Go ahead.
I'd never even considered that. It's like it's a steel roll pin. It's like it's not going to shear. But.
Yeah, well, in Bravo Company, one of the big things that they were bragging about in theirs is it takes the tension off the roll pin, because that's what everyone was afraid of. And, you know, broken roll pins or levers when people were doing the Badger Ordnance tack latch. So I had that in a gun, and I was training rifles for a department at that time, and I was shooting a ton. I was going out on Sundays and shooting 600 to 1,000 rounds every Sunday, working on course material and trying out stuff I'm seeing from other instructors. I remember even at one point taking the Magpul DVDs out on my computer and taking their class. Like just watching it on the range, out there running myself through the course. But I went to Cerakote that rifle eventually, and I disassembled that, and the pin was like, it came over, had a pull in it straight down, and then back down again. It was still all intact, but I sent him a picture of that, and then 4 months later, a new generation of the latch had come out. And I'm not saying I'm the one who got him to change, but I'm probably one of some who ultimately led them to, well, we got something that's slightly off here. It's like people complain about that with SIG's extractors on their 1911s. It's like there's a slight adjustment where these need moved, and they just won't do it, and those guns seem like they would work or they wouldn't work.
Yeah, the companies that are actually receptive to like consumer feedback from the commercial, consumer market, those are the companies that are going to make it in the long run. Companies that only take advice from guys who are issued these rifles and who they might put a lot of rounds through one of these rifles, but they don't have that long-term ownership of these rifles like somebody like you or me might have. Because I've owned this rifle for 5 or 6 years at this point. I've taken it out and shot it. I've taken it to different states and shot it in different environments, and have just basically fucked with the rifle a lot. Mm-hmm. And compared to somebody who may have more rounds through that rifle, somebody who's issued it, there may be just different perspectives there.
Yeah, for sure.
That are important. And different, just the age of the weapon system, and the, operator's familiarity with it makes a huge difference.
Right.
But you brought up Cerakote earlier, so obviously you used to do, or you still do Cerakote.
We'll say used to, because I don't want to do it anymore.
That's fair. That's fair.
I'll take care of my friends. People like you, I'll still do it for. But
yeah, traditionally, you know me, I do rattle can. After I kind of, ripped off that Band-Aid and rattle can my first expensive gun, nothing's been off limits. I rattle can my Scar 20 when I had it. I've considered rattle canning the 417.
Scar 20, and you got that pretty early on, right?
Yeah, I had one of the first ones.
Is that one where you made the internet angry?
Yes, people on Reddit were very, very unhappy. One, because it was kind of a shitty paint job I did. It wasn't my best work. It did the job, but I was using like a mostly empty can of brown spray paint when I was doing the patterning, and it came out as globs. It didn't come out as like a fine mist, and so it gave it this weird texture. But anyway, people were super unhappy about that. But I've considered painting the 417, but I don't want to cover up all the trademark or all the markings that I went through the trouble of having Sig Arms here in Springfield. I had them replicate all those markings, and I don't want to cover that up, mainly because they did such a good job on them. But at the same time, I may just get bored one day and paint it anyway. I'm either going to be, I'm either going to rattle can it and cover everything up, or I'm never going to rattle can it. I'm not going to be the guy who like tapes off the HK logo, because people do that. But obviously I've never shied away from rattle canning, and over the years I've kind of found a place for both in my collection, both Cerakote. If I need like a really specific color and and spray paint's just not going to look right. Mm-hmm. Spray paint is the least similar thing to like anodizing you can get. With the Cerakote that Sigwo did, they actually got really, really close to HK factory anodizing just in appearance.
Yeah.
It's I think it's graphite black or armor black, one of the two.
Yeah, armor is what everyone wants, they think they want, and it comes out a little gray. Whereas graphite black is the one that I love it looks like what that looks like.
I believe it's graphite black, and the hardener mixture is like 24-1. They had to do that much of a ratio just to get it that dark.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do it that dark, it turns out like really glossy.
Yeah, and the darker colors, it's funny, Cerakote says a 12-1 with everything, but the reality is your dark colors, black, olive, a lot of those you can do 12-1, but then when you get to light colors like white or hot pink, you got to be at like 3.5 to 12. Like it's a really different ratio. But that's the other thing, they changed what they're doing a little bit here and there, and it's annoying and you can get a new bottle and mix it up, look at it, and you'll know about where you need to be off everything just from seeing that. But it's annoying when you do a camo and you've got something that's a little flat while other parts are satin, and just one color is off because it's got that almost rough texture because you didn't get the hardener levels correct. But no, that is, so they just did the lower to match the upper?
So the rail, upper, lower, buffer tube, barrel, that's all been recoated. They did work to all of those.
Well, they did an excellent job because I didn't think that was Cerakote. I forgot you said that you had all that done.
Yeah, I have not seen Cerakote that is that convincingly like anodizing.
Yeah.
So yeah, they said it was just because of that 24-1 mixture they did with the hardener. It takes all the gloss out, makes it really matted and kind of subdued. The barrel they chopped down and they kind of reprofiled the front of it to make it look more like a real 417 assaulter barrel. The rail, they cut out that window and added the markings on that for the adjustable gas block. The upper, they actually ground off a fence that was around the bolt paddle, because the newer 417s come with that, but the one that I'm cloning didn't have it.
Oh, that's cool.
So they machined that off and then recoated it. Added the proof marks to make it look like a real German 417 upper, and then of course the lower, they added the full auto marking on the selector.
Who's the one doing all this work?
This was Sigwo Arms in Springfield.
Who's the guy doing it?
His name is Kurt. Don't know his last name.
Gotcha.
But they're on Instagram, and viewers at home can look them up. They've actually done a bunch of these for other people since mine. Since I did my video on it and kind of put it out there like, hey, Sigwo Arms is capable of doing this. They've done it before. I made it really easy for them. Whenever I sent them pictures of what I wanted, I would get a picture of my gun and then the issued gun, and I would circle apart, and I would just say, make this look like this, and they knocked it out of the park.
That's awesome.
Those guys over there are awesome. And they even helped me play around with my gas port size, and there's actually a gas vent on the gas block. It's pointing forward, and it vents off excess pressure to self-regulate the system to an extent. The 416 has a similar thing. It's just a hole in the front of the gas block. But they worked with me on slowly opening up that hole until it was gassed properly with the suppressor. So until I find the actual adjustable gas block that'll let me shoot this gun suppressed without it being like crazy overgassed.
Right.
So they dealt with a level of autism that I do not expect any gunsmith or any gun store to deal with. They put up with it, and they were more than happy to do it. They've actually started selling some 417 specific products. One problem we ran into when we were working on this gun is there's nobody out there making like reaction rods or bench blocks or anything to hold that upper in place. The one company that used to make a reaction rod hasn't done a batch of them in like over a year, and we don't know if there any more are going to come out. But those style of bench blocks where it locks onto the pins, the pin tabs on your upper receiver.
Usually the white plastic materials within the cheap
yeah,
ones.
There are aluminum ones too. So when we got my barrel nut off, we actually used one of those, but it was just locked into the rear pivot pinhole. Mm-hmm. The spacing between the pins is different than an AR-10 or an AR-15, and the front pin is actually a smaller diameter. It's skinnier. And so we were only able to lock it into the rear hole, but that was enough for us to get the barrel nut off. But we were thinking, like, they have a machinist there at the shop. Like, we were able to remove a barrel nut torqued down to 120 foot-pounds with one of the receiver, tabs. What if we made an actual aluminum bench block that locks onto both? That'll be really secure and no risk of damage to the receiver at all. And they made them and put them on, a pre-order list essentially, and they're selling a bunch of those now. Today they just posted the final production pictures of what the final production ones look like. So just me going into the shop and dumping this whole project on them has opened up like a whole new avenue of projects for them.
Yeah, that's incredible.
They've done like 4 more of these ever since I sent mine in. And that we both have learned a lot about the platform, and they've also agreed with my bitching about there being too many roll pins on these guns when you're disassembling them. But they went out and bought specific tools like the barrel nut wrench, the castle nut wrench, because all that stuff's proprietary because HK hates everybody, gunsmiths included. But
yeah, dude, one thing that blew my mind about the Sig MPX, what's the little one? Is it Copperhead?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The upper on that, there's next to no parts in it. Mm-hmm. It's made so simple, and all you really have is you pop the barrel and rail off, which is done very easily, and then you have the 1 or 2 screws that holds in the ejector. But it's so streamlined and simple. I just wish they would do that exact same design, extending the rail out to 8 inches. And if somebody out there would make that, where it's M-LOK 8-inch rail, I'd buy the heck out of that.
Where it's like monolithic.
Yeah, I want that exact, just like Sig did it, just extended out to it for an 8-inch setup. And because I'd love to have the small Copperhead upper, but I'd love to have an 8-inch upper as well, which would be fun. I'd take that to competition and everything too. I don't want to do it with a 4-inch.
Yeah, those Sig MPX and MCX rails, they've always been interesting because you pop out the front pivot pin and they just slide off. Mm-hmm. And like their original sales pitch with that, or at least what I heard a lot of YouTubers talking about, was, you can have different rails set up for it. You can have one that like is the integrally suppressed look, and another one that you take off the can and just put a flash hider on it, and then you get your short set up, and you can have different handguards. Nobody was running different handguards on their MPXs or MCXs. They were all running just picking one length and sticking with it. And so the sacrifice of the rigidity of your handguard, in a lot of people's opinions, and mine included, was not really worth it. Sig actually got it right on the legacy MCX, because the top rail, regardless of what handguard you were running, the top rail was all one piece with the upper.
Yeah.
So you could push your IR lasers or whatever as far out on the rail as you wanted, and that the rail itself, not being as secured, didn't come into play. But then as they went to the Virtus, they shortened that top rail, and now the handguard actually makes up some of that top rail. Well, now you can't mount your IR laser all the way forward anymore, because now it's mounted on the actual handguard and not the upper. And then they continued that trend with the spear. And the spear, they just bolt 2 screws in on the side of the handguard and go, it's good to go.
It's better now.
Well, it turns out it's not.
Right.
People are still having issues with zero shift on those. And it's just one of those weird cases where they got it right the first time, and then they overthought it. And they were buying into their own hype of the thought of this imaginary customer who's going to have 10 different handguards for one gun.
They're doing a lot of that too, where I'm seeing a shift where they're making people upset by changing stuff too much, and then not offering aftermarket support for the old things. And you have something that's only 3 years old and there's no more support for it.
Yep. Sig is the king of beta testing their products on consumers and then coming out with a Gen 2 very quickly after the Gen 1 comes out. And yes, at certain parts, like between the Legacy MCX and the Virtus, the bolt carrier, or at least the bolt itself, is incompatible. They went from regular 90-degree bolt lugs to rounded bolt lugs, like a Knight's Armament has.
Yeah, that everyone's kind of switching to now.
Yeah, and granted, you can put a Virtus barrel into the old Legacy MCX as long as you have the matching Virtus bolt to go with it. But that in itself creates this whole thing where your average consumer doesn't know all of this, and they may pick up a barrel thinking it's for their Virtus, but it's actually for the old one, and then it doesn't work, and
yeah, that moves me into
overcomplicates things.
The thought of the politics of when they decided that the arm braces were illegal, and how many consumers out there never even knew that was temporarily illegal, and the same repercussions of converting a gun to full auto. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, there's guys who've probably had pre-87 machine guns sitting in their safe that were never registered and just never knew.
Well, it made me wonder when they said that was equal to that. It made me wonder how many of your kind of out there people just it's the same as a machine gun. Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and make this a machine gun now. I wonder how many people actually stepped up.
Oh,
to that level.
Yeah, they both come with a 10-year prison sentence.
Yeah, then screw it. I'm going to have some fun before I go at least.
So I have just as equal of a chance of going to jail for an arm brace or a machine gun. That it's like, I can't argue with the logic.
Yep. No, that was just surprising.
And watching the director of the ATF get torn apart in front of Congress was like cathartic. I don't know if you've seen those clips where they're asking him, like, how do you justify making millions of Americans into felons overnight by taking something that you previously said was legal and saying it's now illegal? Yeah. And he kept coming up with the same cookie cutter answer every time. He's like, it's not our intention to turn people into felons. It's like, but you are. You are turning people into felons. That's unequivocally what you're doing. Yeah. Just because it's not your intention doesn't mean that you're not still doing that.
Yeah.
And they just dance around the question and never get around to it's based on the intent of the person. Did they intend to break the law? It's like, well, ignorance of the law is no excuse to break the law. That's always been precedent. So I mean, we just have incompetent morons running really important agencies.
Yep.
Surprise, surprise.
Do you remember Dugan Ashley? Carnicon. Yeah.
Yep.
1 year at SHOT Show when the brace thing, when everyone kept asking questions, and we finally got letters that were saying it is illegal, it's intent, it's not, it is.
Conflicting. Letters.
He took 2 SB braces and taped them to his shoulders with SpongeBob duct tape.
I remember this.
And then paced back and forth in front of the ATF booth. But it was weird at SHOT Show because it's like, it's what's illegal would be the design, not how it's used. Because is this shouldering? Yes. Is this shouldering? Maybe. Yes. Okay. Well, is this shouldering? Is this shouldering?
Yeah.
You know, like at what point is it and is it not? And it's like it's such a gray area, and gray is not illegal.
Well, I was going to say the law has no room for gray area.
Right.
Of course, there's a ton of gray area in the law, but the law by nature there should not be gray. You shouldn't be designing a law with gray area built into it.
Correct.
Like everything needs to be. This is why lawyers exist. Everything needs to be defined exactly with parameters, examples.
Yep.
Intent is such a vague term. It's like, did you intend to break the law? It's like, well, do you mean did they know they were breaking the law, or did they willingly break the law, or where do you draw the line there between somebody who was like, this will all blow over, I'm not going to register my machine gun back in 1987, versus somebody who shouldered an arm brace because they didn't know it was illegal.
Yeah. Well, and when you're at the show and you're out there on the shooting day and on the show floor, no, you can't shoulder that. That's a pistol. Like, and they'll stop you left and right. It's like, it's the design. It's not how. And I get what they're saying is they don't want you doing that, showing that the whole thing is for that reason, right? I understand that. But it's so annoying as you're trying to test things. Like the Copperhead just was announced. I'm excited to shoot it. Well, because shipping it is easier with pistols, they brought out just the braced versions of it. And so you can rest your cheek on it, but you can't put it on your shoulder, which helps. But you're out there sticking this thing on your cheek trying to play the game. We shot a commercial for Anchor Tactical that I was in. And at the end, I was like, so can I? And my buddy's like, yeah. And then boom, I put it on my shoulder and then it cuts to the old color bars and everything.
I still think it's so funny. There's a whole era of gun YouTube where people were cheeking their AR pistols, or they would have that disclaimer before they shot an AR pistol. Oh, if this touches my shoulder, it's incidental and not intentional. And there's like this whole era where we were dancing around it, and there were guys like, T-Rex Arms who, again, to mention Lucas, he was one of the first that was pushing that, like, if your pistol's over 26 inches, you can put a vertical foregrip on it, and it's not a AOW. And just pushing those boundaries and telling people, well, don't go ask the ATF because as they have this written right now, it's legal.
Right.
And if you write them, they're going to make it illegal.
And then everyone starts writing them.
Exactly, that's what idiots do. But you've seen even people like him that were so big on all these workarounds. They have eventually just given in. And if you watch a modern T-Rex Arms videos, all of his guns are like SBR'd or they're 16 inches or longer. There's no pistol braces left on any of his guns, which is hilarious to me.
Sons of Liberty started putting the BCM 80 degree foregrips on all their pistols.
Right, they wouldn't call them vertical foregrips.
Yes, because they weren't 90 and it's all about 90, and with that new name and that angle change of 80 degrees, it was allowed. And I've always choked up my hand at a 45 anyways, so the idea of an angle seemed nice. And once I saw that they were shipping guns with those, I started transitioning to put those. Now I've got SBRs because they decided to ban the braces. Well, then they created an amnesty period where you could apply for SBRs, waive the $200 stamp, and not have to get the stupid ass engraving. So I was cool. All right. Well, I got about 7 guns that I'd like to get SBR'd that I didn't want to pay $1,600 on, and now it's free. Sign me up.
And people out there will say, "Oh, well, you gave the government what they wanted.
It's already
registered." There. Yeah, they already know.
It was already there, dude. I opened a gun shop and had a poster for the movie Gray State, where the movie never came out. The director apparently killed his wife, daughter, and himself, and a lot of people don't think that's what happened. But, like, that's, like, hanging at the shop. Like, I was on a list when I was a cop, when the Boston attacks happened. Every cop I knew, first thing we're doing, Googling pressure cooker bomb. And then what do we see? The list a couple of years ago that comes out that was leaked from the FBI stating, like, 7 or more of these words is what puts you on the list. And, like, FBI, it's literally on there. Bomb is on it. It's like, dude, how many conversations can you and I have in a day that would put us through the NSA listening using AI that would put us on lists that keep bumping us to, okay, now a human has to look at this. Okay, now it's like every day we're going to be hitting that list.
Well, me specifically, like, I have a YouTube channel with, it's not a huge following. I think I have around 13,000 subscribers, awesome. And then my Instagram page is almost 6,000 followers, something like that. Like, it's no secret I have guns. In fact, my photography on a lot of these guns, it's good enough you can zoom in on the serial number if you want to.
Don't post the serial number. Someone will claim that the gun was stolen.
Those are the same people. Those are the same people that you see on Facebook Marketplace posting their car for sale, and they cover up the license plate with their thumb. Yeah,
dude, some of the cover-up methods are hilarious.
It's like, you really think somebody. I guess the rumor I hear, like the thought process there is, well, if you post an SBR serial number online, somebody else can fill out a form with your serial number, transfer it to themselves, and then claim that you stole their SBR. How the hell is that going to work when you have to sign off on the form to transfer it to them?
Yeah.
I've just heard so many, like, arguments that are just completely, patently, like, absurdly untrue.
The power of the internet has created the ability to kill off so many falsehoods that have been regurgitated over the years. And one of my personal favorites that bothers me, and I know one person who's not going to like me saying this, and we'll probably have to talk about it afterwards, customizing your gun.
Oh, as far as, like...
It's legal issues. It's not a legal issue. And you even have that guy who had a horrible shooting in law enforcement, it was the wrong guy using the wrong verbal commands, wrong situation with the guy who's drunk in the hallway and making him crawl, and ends up shooting and killing that guy. Put me in that situation. I'm armchairing like you were talking about earlier. That wouldn't happen because I have better verbal communication than that guy. And I get there's elements of that call where I wasn't there. I didn't hear that there's a gun in play, whatever that dispatchers told him. So yes, there is more to the story that I don't know. But my gosh, he sounded like he hadn't been in law enforcement long and was very scared in the situation in a manner that I think I would have better composure. Now, he had something on his dust cover that was like, this is going to be the one that finally screws somebody over. And then nothing happened. But then they're like, well, now it's going to get him civilly. That's been how many years? And I've not heard anything of a civil suit.
Oh, like the smile, wait for flash? Or
it was something stupid like that, or maybe die MFR or something. I don't remember. It was something stupid.
Now, I could see a lawyer bringing that up in court to try and just poison the jury's opinion of you. It would have to be pretty ridiculous for it to actually, I think, have any impact. Now, granted, I do love the term 12 people too stupid to get out of jury duty are the ones who decide your fate.
That is scary. I've not heard that side of it.
I do get that. And there's not a doubt in my mind lawyers try stuff like that. Like, if you have a Confederate flag as your rear plate on your Glock, they're going to bring that up.
Especially when you shoot a black guy with that.
If you shoot a minority with it, that is almost certainly going to be brought up.
Yep.
But aside from that, if you have an aftermarket barrel or an aftermarket trigger, the argument with the trigger being, a hair trigger or trying to argue you didn't mean to shoot him, how is that going to come into play when you're saying, yes, I intended to shoot this person, I intended to stop them from doing what they were doing? That's never even going to be a factor. Like, how is the strategy of proving you accidentally shot them for a prosecuting attorney a better strategy than going with you admitting you meant to shot him?
So a friend of mine by the name of Frank, who also used to do Cerakote, that I will have on here, he's already been invited on and he'll probably come on pretty soon. He'd been in 2 shootings, both of which were custom modded guns that he had modded himself to extremes. Triggers, polishing, the works. And at one point, it was brought up by one of them in court. The other one, it's obviously a completely modded Glock, like paint and everything, right? And like grip work, the mag well, like just completely to the gills, had everything. And then the other one, same thing. I think it was a Sig 220 was his first one, and he had done polish work on that. So one of them, it was brought up, and he said, it makes me more accurate. The only issue where modding the gun to make the trigger pull lighter, that's a problem, is if I shoot grandma pushing the kid in the stroller. I shot the guy shooting at me. And that was it. So the way I like to voice it is, if you want to save yourself 10 minutes in court, maybe 2-3 hours of a berating over just nonsense, then stick to all the factory stuff. And people even say painting your gun, Cerakote, will create problems. Yeah, it may create some questions in court. It may slow the overall process a little bit, but that's it. And then primary and secondary used to be a very small, tight-knit group. Now it's huge. There's a lot of people that follow them and everything, and honestly, I don't really follow a lot that much anymore, but I used to be fairly active in the forums and everything on Facebook. That was a decade ago. And I asked on there one day, because it was predominantly instructors that were in there. There's a bunch of your people who are nationwide instructors, LE agencies, all this stuff that were in this group. And I said, does somebody have proof that they can pass to me where modifying a weapon, whether visual or, the mechanics of the gun, has bound somebody up in court? If you have that, please answer yes. And if I got to pay for police reports or whatever on that kind of stuff to look into it, I'm just trying to get actual case studies where this has happened. 82 comments later, no. And the moderators kept getting on it. Guys, if you don't have proof, stop talking. Like, that's how we do this group. Back then, it's like, I don't know if they're still this strict, but if you're commenting and you're not directly answering the question, then do not, and they snap at you for it, saying, stop that. We're not here to just have a big, dumb conversation full of idiots. This is going to be educational. And after 82 comments, I had a couple hearsay elements of, I know of an issue at a department from a buddy, and I'm going to reach out, and no one brought me anything. And that was the moment I decided, until I'm proven otherwise, this is a fallacy that the internet has proven. It's gone. And I think that's so interesting. while there's a bunch of numbnuts on the internet, and ARFCOM obviously gets a bad rep as being like the jokester place, or at least used to. I don't really hear that joke anymore, but 5 years ago it's like, oh, on ARFCOM, and people started doing that, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, there are the goons out there, but you can't just read one thing and take that as truth. But the internet overall, anybody knows, if you're researching a subject and you get enough opinions, you're going to see the common message, which again, sometimes is wrong. But more likely, if you're seeing the one that's got a good common answer and the answer sounds educated with a thorough response, you know that's how we build what we know anymore.
I think that, how do I phrase this? Completely lost my train of thought. Give me a second.
All good. I'm gonna take a pee break.
Yeah, you're good.
Spit it.
So I think that the grain of truth there is to, you know, the whole rumor about modifying your guns and the lawyer painting you bad in the courtroom, you know, to a jury of 12 people too stupid to get out of jury duty. The grain of truth there is that lawyers do try everything they can to just make you look like the devil in court. My argument to the modified gun thing would be there's way easier things to go after with most of us, especially gun owners who are into the gun community, who especially the people who run Instagram pages and obviously have a, you know, fascination with guns. That's way easier to just paint somebody as some gun-toting lunatic who's obsessed with guns and has had this dream of shooting people, you know, than it is to convince a jury that, oh, well, his trigger was too light, so he shot this person in an accident, but he's really telling you he did it on purpose. That whole argument just makes no sense to me. But
Yeah.
like for me in particular, I can imagine if I was sitting in a courtroom and a prosecuting attorney was looking at my online presence, they'd be like, oh, jackpot, you know, we're just going to say this guy's a wannabe MEAL Team 6 Navy SEAL who just wants to, you know, has these delusions that he's like a Navy SEAL because he has guns that are like the Navy SEALs, and they would point to the guns themselves, just the nature of them, of being clones. Be like, well, this gun was designed with the killing purpose that
Right.
should only be wielded by a Navy SEAL, and this regular civilian EMT wannabe shouldn't have ever had a gun like that in the first place. That they would be way more successful at convincing a jury of than my trigger was too light.
It's interesting how much of like character development is part of a jury's decision, and that a lot of that stuff isn't just
And
thrown
character
out.
assassination.
Yeah. It's kind of wild.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a good defense attorney, you're gonna, you know, make your client show up well dressed, well presented. You're gonna ask him to appear as friendly as possible, as non-confrontational, non-emotional as possible. You know, seem like a reasonable human being, because that all plays into it. If the jury thinks that you are a loose cannon, you're making the prosecutor's job really, really easy.
Yeah. Or the two cases that come to mind where you see a lot of that push on character would be the Zimmerman and Trayvon Martin shooting, and then the Kyle Rittenhouse.
I was about to say Kyle Rittenhouse especially. He brought up the fact that he played video games as justification. He said, "You play Call of Duty, right?" And Kyle's like, "Yeah, where are you going with this?" Like, everyone was confused. He's like, "Well, what you do in Call of Duty is you kill people, right?" And Kyle's like, "In a video game, in a virtual world, sure."
Yeah.
And just, he nailed it with his responses. Like, he made this guy look like a complete jackass for trying to equate playing a video game to... That's such an, like, old boomer thing to do, is to equate video games to wanting to murder somebody.
I think they do the opposite for the most part, and they actually give people a release. Because I also love the idea... I can't quote how many times I'd love to shoot out the tire of someone who's being an asshole on the road. But in GTA, I do it. You know? It's
exactly.
Like you get a bit of that release. You walk down the street, someone pipes off to you, and you deck them. I'm not going to do that in real life because I don't want the assault record. You know?
It's just people's fear of what they don't understand. Old people didn't grow up with video games.
Yeah.
They have no affinity for them, so they attribute all of these just outlandish attributes to it.
Look at people our age who can't understand children's interests in TikTok. Like, we're becoming boomery at that.
Right, we write it off as this ADHD thing. Like, oh, this is brain rot. It's for people who are stupid. And when in reality, like, I've seen genuinely good content come from TikTok. There's a lot of garbage that comes from it, but the early days of YouTube were filled with garbage.
Yes.
And YouTube is like our generation's like one of the biggest commodities,
How did Vines fail? Because that was like the original TikTok, the 5-second clips, and it was like everywhere, and then just
I can't remember why exactly they closed it down, but it was an odd choice because it was so successful, and it left a gaping hole in the social media that it was immediately filled by apps like TikTok.
Yeah.
I feel like they gave up a lot of ground there. Vine could still be a thing, and it could have made TikTok never a thing if it had stuck around.
Right.
It was essentially the same formula, although TikToks can be a lot longer than 5 seconds. So maybe they probably would have had to adapt to that kind of content. But
it's interesting seeing different companies that are already big that see the new thing and then they mimic it, like Snapchat. Mm-hmm. And then Instagram offered that feature way too late.
Yeah.
Way too late. It's like if you're seeing that people are obsessing with it, drop it immediately. Mm-hmm. And just same thing with YouTube finally getting around to doing shorts, creating something to compete, and then TikTok's like crap. They took some of our fire. We'll do extended full length videos now. And now I think one of the best things ever with Twitter or X is the fact that they're doing video content. I don't know if it's like this for big channels, but for me, it's only 1080p. We shoot this in we actually shoot this in 6K. But I wish they would do it in 4K because we have that and it looks better. And they were limiting video lengths, and now once you pay for the premium membership or whatever, your checkmark deal, now you can have, I think it's up to 3.5 hours. Mm-hmm. So it's like if we ever go past 3.5, we'll split it into 2 episodes. Because I really want to merge people to X because there's full freedom of speech. Whereas YouTube, I know there's certain restrictions, certain episodes of podcasts that get cut, and for really silly reasons sometimes, other reasons, I get where they're coming from on it. But the fact that we don't have to worry about that, and there's a big reason why this is separate from my old channel. And I wanted to do this differently and approach things outside of guns as well, because I know I'm going to be limited on YouTube. And when we see that shift, you've got big names doing stuff on X now, and when X gets to where it's 4K, and when X recognizes stop making people pay for a blue check mark to keep the video playing in background, because you can get out of the app and keep stuff running if you pay. But it's like if they get rid of some of that stuff or add some of these features, I think you'll see where a lot of X will grow. And then even what's his name? Mr. Beast. Mm-hmm. Like, Elon was inviting him to come on there, so he's posted a few videos on there, kind of as testing waters, but I think originally the money side wasn't paying what YouTube was, and it wasn't going to make sense for him. And you had a gun part featured in one of the videos, right?
In Mr. Beast's video? Oh, yeah, so I sold an IR laser to a gentleman who ended up being in a Mr. Beast video. It was one where a guy had to design like this protective thing for a Lamborghini, and if it protected it from all these bullets, then he got to keep the Lambo. Yeah. And the guys that he hired for the video to shoot this barrier this guy had built, they all had Mark 18s, and they were all owned by one guy that I follow on Instagram and talk to somewhat frequently. And one of the guns in it was my old IR laser that I sold him. So it's like, that's cool. Small world. Something I sold a guy ended up in a Mr. Beast video.
I remember you telling me that months ago, and I don't know, like a month ago, I started watching a bunch of Mr. Beast videos, and I was like wondering what's it going to be, and then kind of accidentally stumbled on that one and assumed that that's where it was.
Yeah, it was one of the, not PEC 15s, but it was PEC 16 that I traded to the guy for that scope years ago. Because back then they were worth about the same. Now the PEC 16 is actually worth quite a bit more. But
is that the 2.5 to 10?
Yep, that's the Night Force NXS 2.5 to 10. That is
now $4,000.
Yeah, my favorite. I don't know if you can really call it an LPVO because it's 2.5 to 10. It's not a one buy.
I'd still call it an LPVO.
Yeah, it's still my favorite. It looks the coolest, and it has amazing glass quality. It works really well with clip-on, thermals or night vision devices, and it just looks cool. That. Lately, there's been like this in the clone community. There's been people kind of talking shit on it, saying it's like looking through a toilet paper tube, saying it had like a narrow field of view or not a forgiving eye box. It's like, well, it's a 20-year-old optic at this point. if you're comparing it to a brand new Leupold Mark V or a Schmidt and Bender PM2 that's freshly off the production line, yeah, it's going to be a little more limited. But I have never had an issue with that scope in practical use. Like,
while it's not really lighter than some of the options, the fact that it's got so much smaller of a footprint, it feels so much more maneuverable. I love that optic, and the one that I'm running right now would be a Vortex Razor Gen 2, the 1-6, and that thing's crazy because it's like a big old EOTech window, beautiful red dot on it when you want to run it as a red dot. But at the same time, now, for multiple reasons, we want to run the other optic, and so there's no reason for it to be a 1 power. Like, that does everything you need it to do, because if you're needing something you need a 1 power, first off, you probably don't need to be using your sights, and second off, and when you're at the point you need to use sights, you're going to be very fast at 2.5 to get on somebody. So to me, it answers all the questions that the 1-6s, 1-8s, and 1-10s will do.
Well, and you see this exact scope on so many different service weapons. I mean, it's from... I've seen them on Mark 18s. I've seen them on 14.5-inch M4s.
I put mine on the Mark 18 originally, that one that I built.
There's a picture I love. It's a guy, they call it the Mini Recce. It's a Mark 18 with a Harris bipod, that scope with a backup Doctor red dot sight on the back and a suppressor. And it's just like a little miniaturized, like, Recce rifle, but... they put them on 417s, Scars. I've seen them on SR25s. Just anything and everything. Like, Navy and Air Force guys just loved them. I mean, they put them on damn near everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I got this one. I've never had any other than this. I've had this one in my collection for probably, I don't know, it's probably been 6 years now. And I don't think I'll ever get rid of it, even though it's gone up so much in price. I just don't see a reason to. I'm always going to need a clone that has that scope on it in my collection.
That makes sense.
Just one of those parts I can't justify getting rid of.
I regret selling mine. And now, especially seeing the price we're at, maybe I would have sold it by now because of how expensive they are. And when I bought mine, you couldn't get them as a civilian. You had to be, like, I got it through law enforcement. And then it was like 5 months after that, they've opened them up for public sale. And of course, that's after the Bin Laden book came out, and where he specifically states the Night Force in excess.
I mean, it's just a great all-around. It's not like a long-range precision optic, but for short to medium range, it's phenomenal.
And that's all I ever care about.
My first quality scope I ever bought for a gun, this is before I was into cloning with real firearms. My first couple guns I built were not clones necessarily, but one of them was this scope, but with the 32 millimeter objective. And I was blown away. I went from a Trijicon AccuPower to that Night Force, and I was blown away just how much better I could see at distance with that Japanese glass they use in these is just phenomenal. But if you find the version of this scope that has the nav spec or Navy spec marking on the bottom, that's easily a $3,000 to $4,000 scope.
Yeah.
And I actually found there was somebody that I follow on Instagram. He was asking for pictures of guns of Army specific guns, Army SF guns using that scope, because the Army had their own spec of it too. They had an Army spec NXS 2.5 to 10, and he had, I guess, come into possession of one. They're very, very rare. There weren't very many of them made, and he wanted to know what he could clone using that scope. And I was asking him some questions about it, and he's like, yeah, it's kind of like the worst layout I've ever seen. The turrets, the elevation turret, every click was one MOA. Or it was a whole MOA per click. That's what Leupold used to do on their Mark IV series.
Because they wanted to set it up for like real long-range stuff?
They had the speed turrets. You could dial in out to distance really, really quickly with fewer clicks. And now, of course, that sounds insane, because it's like, why would you need to dial out a distance that quickly at the loss of that kind of precision in your adjustments? Because, at close up, you're only adjusting 1 inch at 100 yards per click, but at 1,000 yards, every click is 10 inches. You can't adjust anywhere within that 10 inches. It's either you're down here or you're 10 inches up with one click.
None of the clicks really matter to me. I'd rather do, the quarter clicks or MOA because I use Kentucky windage. So I just want zeroed at the distance I want to know, and from there it's just I'm going to move my holdover. And that's where I love the Horus Christmas tree reticles. I think those are sweet for follow-ups. It's not something that's going to help you with fun hunting, but
I've had a couple scopes that have the Tremor 2 or Tremor 3 reticles, and one of those, it was on my Mark 13 300 Win Mag, which I've since sold, unfortunately, but I shot that rifle out to a mile, and it was the Christmas tree reticle that let me land I think it was my third shot I hit a target at a mile with it. Just, I had my rough data that told me generally how much drop I should have with the load I was using and, the barrel, the height over bore, all those factors. And it got me within like 2.5 mils. So, at a mile, that's like, I missed by several feet, but I could see where I hit with the Christmas tree reticle, and then I adjusted up based on that, and then it was really close, and the third shot I smacked it.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, there's definitely something to be said for that. I'm a big fan of cheat sheets, though. You can see from where you're sitting my cheat sheet that's inside the rear lens cap. It goes out to 600. It's not anything, for super long distances. I have shot the recce out to, I think, 800. With the right ammo, it'll do it, but it's just delivering so little energy at that distance. It's like, why? I can prove I can do it, but I typically run the IMI 77 grain out of the 15.1 inch barrel. It's doing like right at 2,700 feet per second.
Have you ran Barnes at all, TSX?
I have not. So Barnes is becoming, especially with 300 blackout within like tier 1 groups in the military, Barnes is like kind of the go-to. But yeah, I stick with especially SPR type rifles and my Mark 18. If I want to put my like good ammo in it, it's 77 grain Sierra Match Kings.
So I have an actual box of Mark 262 of the Sierra.
Oh, the black holes.
Yeah, and when I built my Mark 12, I read all this stuff on the internet about what it's going to do, and it didn't deliver. Like even at 100 yards, which again, it's not where I should be checking that gun out, but at 100 yards, I was still shooting like 1 3/4 inches with it.
Yeah, so the Douglas barrels they used as blanks, the majority of them were good barrels, but they're not as consistent as something like a Criterion or a Krieger. I've got a Compass Lake barrel in this gun. It's made off a Douglas blank, but Compass Lake finished the chamber and threading, muzzle, all that, and they did their own chambering that leads to a little bit more pressure than just standard a 5.56 or even a 2.23 Wild chambering. They said that if you have cheaper ammo, there's actually a danger of blowing out primers with this chambering because of the added pressure. But with the IMI 77 grain, I've had really good luck with it. I use that because it's a fraction of the cost of the Black Hills. And
have you tried Fiocchi's?
I've tried Fiocchi.
How did it do?
It did all right. I actually ran this rifle previously was a Mark 12 Mod 1 with the 18-inch barrel, and I ran the gun in that state through a precision rifle course with the Fiocchi because at the time I worked at a store that sold the Fiocchi 77 by the case, and I got a case of it before the class. It did okay. It was around 1 inch to 1 1/4 at 100 yards, which for an AR I'm always going to say is acceptable.
Yeah.
I will say with the IMI, I'm getting way faster velocities though. The Fiocchi and Federal Gold Medal Match. Gold Medal Match is the most accurate stuff I've tried. Yeah. It's consistently 3/4 MOA or better out of this rifle, but it only chronos 2450. The IMI is like 90 to 95% as accurate, and it chronos 2700.
Yeah,
it's a substantial difference, and so that's why I stocked up on that ammo.
Makes sense.
Same with Black Hills, same deal. It's loaded to a pressure. It's a much hotter cartridge, and so you get the same benefits, but it's more expensive than the IMI. So ultimately, that's why I stick with it. But
I haven't shot any of that. I got some of the Fiocchi, but I've never even ran it through anything because I think I bought it for that Mark 12, which I eventually parted out.
It's accurate enough ammo. It's just slow. It's like the Gold Medal Match. Not loaded as hot. But yeah, I mean, I'm sad Compass Lake Engineering is going by the wayside. They're not going to be a thing anymore, I guess. So I have one of their last barrels in there.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It makes me wish I would have grabbed another one or two of them, because I plan on keeping this gun forever.
Yep.
And it would have been nice to have just some spare barrels for it, but worst case scenario, I'll just get a Criterion or something to replace it if I do manage to shoot this one out.
Yeah.
I've always had good luck with those two.
Well, shoot, man. I think that's about all I got for today.
Yeah? I think you got it out of your system?
Yeah. I guess tell people where to find you again.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at inferior_rifles, and then YouTube, just Inferior Rifles.
And on Instagram, you will have to type that whole name out to find you, because I've done that where you're not searchable under Inferior,
Yes,
even though I already follow you. You have to type out.
I've been shadow banned for a while on Instagram. I'm not sure what I did to earn it, but
You posted guns.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at some point I went from getting like 1,000 new followers every month to like 10.
Yeah.
Getting up to 5,000 followers took me like 2 years, and then getting from 5,000 to 6,000 has taken me like 4.
Wow.
And so yeah, they hide my search results. Like when I try searching other hashtags, I can't even. It'll show like 2 pictures, and then even though it'll say there are 1,000 results, it'll show me like 2 pictures.
Well, maybe you've tapped the clone market.
So,
You've only got like 57 more to find out there.
yeah, but luckily I wasn't that way on Instagram, because I started my channel. I think I had like 500, remaining subscribers from when it used to be an Airsoft channel way back in the day. Like back in 2014 or something. I had like 500 subscribers, and then in the course of 6 months I got up to like 10,000.
Wow.
And so YouTube has been a lot more friendly despite demonetizing several of my videos. They're more predictable.
Do you do shorts?
I have like 2 shorts on the channel. I don't do them often.
Some of that's so weird. You'll see them just jump, and then wall. And then for 2 months later, all of a sudden they'll jump, give you another like 10,000 hits, and it's crazy. I had one that it went to 1 million, and it gets just a little. It's like 1,007,000, and then just walls for like 4 months straight, and then all of a sudden, boom! It drives up, and they give me another 100,000 views, and then it just walls again.
The algorithm is so weird on YouTube, and I mean, if I could figure out how it actually worked, I'd be a millionaire.
Oh, I think everyone would.
If we knew how it actually worked. Something I was going to say earlier is the fact that I've used the phrase or used the word suicide like 3 times in this recording. If you don't go back and bleep those out, it'll probably demonetize you.
Does it really?
Just the words. People on YouTube have been getting all sorts of creative ways of getting around that. Like instead of saying suicide, they say sewer slide, or they say not aliving themselves, or stuff like that. That, and then if you show installing a suppressor on a gun, which could literally just be screwing it onto the end of the barrel, they'll demonetize.
What does that look like when you do that?
Yeah, like I've actually cut my video to show or to not show the suppressor,
crazy.
And they still demonetize.
See, I heard people were having issues with magazines, and that's when I was
same thing with magazines. Yeah. If it's over, I think 20 rounds or so, it's either 10 or 20 rounds. If you insert a magazine, and it doesn't matter if it's any magazine, they're going to demonetize it anyway. Right. But their policy is it's over a certain number of rounds. Also, if you say the word demonetize, then the algorithm will pick up on that when it's processing your video, and it'll make them take a harder look at it, is my understanding. So I just said a bunch of shit that's going to make sure you don't make any money on this, so I apologize for that.
Well, no worries. I think you're still going to have a good amount of your crowd who will want to watch this, so that'll be findable.
This is technically a face reveal, I guess.
Oh, because you've not done that.
I haven't done an official face. If you look at my pictures on my Instagram, you can see like a little bit of my face in some of my photos, but I never point out when it's me or when it's one of my buddies shooting, because there's different people shooting my guns in those photos. And then people who went to... Oh, one thing I do want to shout out before we're done. The clone rifle shoot, the one I went to a couple of years ago, they're doing another one this year. But yeah, the guys who saw me at that one, a lot of them saw me for the first time. Yeah. And they didn't know that I was this huge 6'8" guy. They also didn't know that I'm in my 20s. Like, I'm turning 29 this year. I guess a lot of them assumed that I was like in my 30s or 40s because all they hear is my voice.
Yeah.
So yeah, this will be kind of a face reveal. But
that clone shoot, what's it called? Where's it at?
So it's just the clone rifle shoot. It's going to be at the Ben Franklin Range. It's in Pennsylvania. I forget the actual city, but the Ben Franklin Range. If you don't follow them on Instagram, you should. It's a really cool, huge facility. They've got like dirt bike trails and stuff too there, but they've got a shoot house. They've got multiple rifle ranges, one that goes out to a mile, and they've been like awesome to work with on setting up this clone shoot. They're super excited about it. I mean, they host events there all the time, but they've been very on board with like what Chris, the guy who's hosting it, is trying to do, and people like me who are helping to promote it. I mean, he's right on in there on Instagram every day with us, sharing and getting the word around.
Right.
So it's going to be fun. It's going to be bigger than the one that was in 2022.
Which already looked really big from the pictures.
Yeah, it was like 110 cloners that were there.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them that I'd followed on Instagram for years and never actually met in person.
Yeah.
It was crazy seeing that many clone rifles in one place. I mean, there were, I shit you not, probably millions of dollars worth of clones at this shoot.
That's nuts.
I mean, the Knight's Armament stuff alone was probably $1 million, not even counting HK and Colt and FN and all the other stuff. But yeah, it's awesome. There's sponsors that are bringing machine guns to rent. That was my first time getting to shoot an MP7, was at the last one. I believe those guys will be there again. They're bringing the MP7, MP5s, and everything. Belt-fed machine guns, Ohio Ordnance. They're one of the more well-known sponsors who's going to be there. They brought out a Modus for the last one.
Wow.
So yeah, it's going to be a good time. It's a 2-day event this time, Saturday and Sunday, with a night shoot in between Saturday night.
That would be cool.
Yeah, so Sunday I think will mainly be like competitions, and so it's going to be a good time.
Are you part of managing that, or is it some other thing where you just go?
No, just because I have one of the bigger cloning pages on Instagram, I've been like highly involved in helping promoting it, but it's not like my thing. It's Chris's. He runs the Clone Rifles Instagram page, and I'm more than happy to help because it's awesome that somebody's putting it up.
For the night shoot, there's a company I want to put you in touch with that'll probably sponsor in a way that would be really valuable. So
I'll
put you in touch with the guy and see if that could work out.
Yeah, I'll send them Chris's way because he's always open to sponsor, and he doesn't do it for the money. He actually lost money on the first clone shoot.
Yeah.
I don't know if he wants me saying that. I apologize, Chris, but
anything like that's typical for the first 5 years even.
Well, his wife got kind of mad at him, I guess, for she was like, okay, this needs to be a one-time thing because this is just you getting to hang around your buddies and shoot guns, and we can't just waste money on this. But they've got, I think, more sponsors this coming year, and they raised the ticket price a little bit so that he can at least break even.
Good.
So he's doing it just out of his love for this hobby and just purely out of that. He was telling me he paid out of pocket to have Administrative Results do a little promo for it during one of his videos. And I'm not going to say how much it was, but it was a surprising amount of money for a little 30-second, like, hey, go and check out this event thing. So, he's putting everything he has into it, and it makes this hobby so much more like worth it when you have stuff like that to look forward to. When you actually get to go meet all these people in person, shoot all these different clones, and it makes it more of a community thing rather than me just sitting at home in my basement.
Well, and when you're interested in such a unique angle, like there's people who are gun people, and most people who aren't gun people who think of gun people, they're wrong. The gun people they think are gun people are not gun people, right? And then you dive into the super nerds, which I believe you and I both are in that category, but then you're in a specific area that I'm not really big into, but there are people who are. I don't even remember my point of going into this. Oh, it's interesting when you get to go and be surrounded by a bunch of people who have that. And it's like when I started doing security for the, I'll call them nerd conventions, doing the Comic-Cons and stuff, it was beautiful seeing so many people there, so many people that I also know have dealt with struggles and things, based on things that they may like. And when they are in an environment that they can totally tell they're comfortable in, non-judgmental, safe space, whatever you want to call it, it's really beautiful. Like, because you can see just this happiness in people's faces that is not their normal life because they get to be around their people. And that's super cool. And I assume that you get kind of a vibe from that with the clone shoot.
It's so unusual to feel that with cloning because the reaction to cloning, especially on social media, and I know I keep bringing up Reddit, it's mostly positive, but it's always like backhanded compliments.
Right.
It's like, oh, that's really cool. I wouldn't waste the money on that, but that's really cool.
Right.
Stuff like that. Or it's just people straight up shitting on it.
Right.
Like, why would you want this? I don't get it. But yeah, like, just all the little things about a gun that make it cool to me, being around other people who appreciate those same fine little details. You know, everything from one example I can bring up on a selector switch on an AR. This is what pretty much every military AR for the history of military issue guns has had, is this style selector. But you've also seen the kind where this raised portion goes all the way onto like the disc. Right. The cloners call those hot dog selectors, and they're not clone correct. And it's just teeny tiny little details like that like 99% of people don't notice.
Dude, it's fun. I love diving into some of this, and this is where I thought this would be fun, because like that LMT build that I did, I dehorned the entire gun. Like just weird things. I don't want the sharp edges anywhere, so everything was filed down before I coated it. I used a shield arms folding lower, so I could throw it in a bag. Well, the shield arms folding lower for a lefty, the thumb is invasive in the selector area, so I ended up beveling that whole area down. It was just an unneeded metal there. The trigger guard is boxed off, and it's like, well, that's creating a hot spot for my middle finger to rest against, so I rounded those out. But it's like all those little details that all go through on that side. It's fun seeing the clone correct element where you're nitpicking all those little things.
It's got to give you the warm fuzzies when somebody points out that. When you don't prompt them to. It's like those little things you notice that somebody else notices. I had a comment on Reddit one time that I'll remember forever, because it was a picture of my Mark 18, and he's like, oh, you've got the CQD sling mounts, you have the Colt ambi selector, you have this rail, this and that. And it was all these hard to find parts that like 99% of it goes over most gun owners' heads. But he was like, I appreciate this build because those parts, while there's nothing inherently special about them, those are rare and hard to find, and I can tell you put a lot of effort into assembling all those. And yeah, the clone shoot is just like the ultimate form of that. It's just a bunch of us all nerding out and, seeing these rare parts that I've spent hours trying to track down online. Well, this guy's actually got one.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, before we break or end this, I'm going to grab something and I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right. When we first started talking, you said of something that you wanted, and I realized I had one, so I thought I'd give it to you.
Oh, shit. Gen 1 PMAG.
In the package.
Damn, I would almost feel bad about opening that.
Isn't that crazy?
Man. Yeah, that's, I was going to say, I've got a black one at home, but it's got the window on it, and I actually tried to find the non-windowed version for, like, the longest time. And because there was a certain gun I was cloning, a certain reference photo, and it had one of these, and just could not find it for the life of me. But, dude, that's awesome. Is there a manufacturer date on this? I'm just curious when it was made.
No idea.
2000. When did these come out?
I don't know that either.
Yeah, there's not a date to be found anywhere on that, but oh well. Dude, awesome. Oh, that's sick. Was this from Mac? Or do you remember?
No, I recently acquired those buying a collection. It was about a year ago. And I think I threw one in my collection and the other one I set aside to eventually sell. But when you said you're looking for one, I'm like, well, shoot.
Yeah, I'm always looking for good stuff for photos because, like I said, I don't go out and like use and abuse these, and they mainly just stay in the gun. But when I actually go to shoot them, they get the the mags that work.
Right.
Which actually these aren't bad. Like they have the non-tilt follower and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think they're just thinner than the newer PMags if I remember right.
Probably.
But
man, I'd still love to get one of the clears.
Oh,
the old clears that never made it to. There's a few out there that did, but I think they were all protos. I don't think they ever released any of them, right? I want to say those are Gen 2s that were clear. Maybe they were Gen 1.
Yeah, I think either 2 or M2. Those were just like for demo, just to show like the anti-tilt follower function.
Yep. Well, you know how the HK does the clear
guns and stuff.
For armor guns. I've handled their clear MP7, and I'll show you some pictures of that. I took a ton of pictures all around it, just walking around the gun, just because it was so interesting. But I actually got the armor cert on those. I'm like, well, I guess I still don't get to shoot one, but I at least get to take it apart and put it together several times. And Yeah, that was fun. Just being around those and seeing all the clears, and I did that up in Virginia at the Gray Room, or
Oh,
where
that's
the Gray
awesome.
Room is. And while I'm there, the day I'm doing MP5, Larry Vickers walks in and he signed my MP5 book. I was bummed. He left the next day. I started 416, and he was part of the design team
Right.
on the 416, and I wish I had a signature on that manual. But yeah, later on in the day, I'm in the Gray Room. He's in the Gray Room. I was like, hey, can I get another picture with you? And he's like, yeah, that's fine. Can I ask why? And I was like, well, Larry Vickers is cool, but Larry Vickers in the Gray Room is kind of extra.
Oh, yeah.
And so, I was talking to him recently about something, and I sent him that picture, and I made him upset because that's probably the biggest he ever was when he was more overweight, and he wasn't very pleased about how he looked in the photo. But he was up there with his photographer shooting his pictures for the book of HK, you know, as he's done the SIG book and everything. So that was pretty cool.
Man, it's crazy how people will literally shit on an American hero. Like, he was a Green Beret, he was Delta.
Yep.
And he gave the best years of his life to the military,
Yep.
and, you know, nobody keeps up that physique after getting out, that kind of training regimen you have to go through.
Well, he made that video, Why I'm Fat.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is crazy.
I agreed with everything
Yeah.
he said in that. And, like, you know, obviously as a big person, like, this is one reason I've been hesitant to, like, do any kind of face reveal, is because, well, one, there's no meaning to it, there's no reason to, but two, the internet can't handle seeing a fat person. And I'm not one of these, you know, super lefty, like, fat acceptance people. Like, yeah, it's unhealthy, I should lose weight, I'm trying to, it's a struggle. But, like, it's not anybody at home's job to tell me. Like, I know, I'm well aware, I'm a functioning adult human being who's intelligent enough to know, like, yeah, I need to change.
Yeah.
It just that instant, like, instinct of the internet just to bully somebody because they're big. It's like, regardless of what they have to say or what their background is, like, I'm even more in a position to, you know, get that kind of backlash, that because I wasn't Delta Force like Larry Vickers, and even he gets it, so it's like, oh,
Right.
What are they gonna say about me?
Right. No, you know what's funny about that is I know another guy who won't do a face reveal, and some people probably know who I'm talking about with this, but he's an Asian male who's about my age. I'm 37. He's around my age, but back in the day when he started, he's in his 20s, and he would never show his face, and I ended up asking him, and he's like, I want everybody to think I'm a 50-year-old white guy. Because the moment they see that I'm a skinny little Asian nerd, they're going to stop listening to me. And right now, everyone is listening to me.
Perception is so huge. And, like, even in my YouTube videos, I've done, you know, I'm always behind the camera, but sometimes my hands are in front of the camera doing something. And somebody was trying to say I have, like, edema in my hands, like they're, you know, saying like they're swelling. No, I just have really huge fucking hands. I'm 6'8". I've been able to palm a basketball since I was 10.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have, like, yeah, I have sausage fingers, but it's not fucking, I'm 29 and I'm perfect, like, you know, I have no medical history whatsoever. I don't have edema. But yeah, somebody left that comment to one of my videos. They're like, you have edema, you're going to die. It's like, thanks.
Dude, I got called fat on mine on a regular basis too. And it's like, and I was less than I weigh right now. I'll say, yeah, I got a gut or whatever, and I'm back and forth. I'm actually down 17 pounds in the last month. I finally had one of those motivating things that got me to start losing weight. But no, the comments on that stuff is funny. I remember guys like, not going to take gun advice from a guy who plucks his eyebrows or whatever, and I ended up commenting back, and I found almost everyone who talks smack, if you kill them with kindness and a joke, they become a fan because you interacted with them. It's like they're angry, but I ended up telling him, it's like, actually, dude, I just was born with these eyebrows, but there's about 6 strays in the middle, and I will pull those. But thanks for watching the video, and he's like, haha, cool, man, new subscriber.
Yeah, my favorite thing on this planet is when somebody is, like, attacking me on Reddit for anything.
Yeah.
Like, I put up a joke post on Reddit. It was all my guns together, and it said, this is 95% of my net worth, which is sort of a joke, sort of isn't.
Sort of isn't.
I mean, I'm a homeowner and I have a car, but my guns make up a bigger percentage of my net worth than they probably should. And some guy was leaving this scathing comment about how I'm an idiot and I'm misinterpreting the American dream, and I spend my day playing with useless toys instead of, you know, doing something productive. Like, I'm a fucking EMT, and the guy's trying to tell me I don't do any good in this world. Like, fuck off. But anyway, I look at the guy's profile. My favorite thing on this planet is when I look at their profile and all they do all day is comment on porn subreddits, and I'm like,
oh wow,
got him.
That's funny.
Yeah, like this guy was, and it wasn't just like vanilla, like normal stuff. Like this guy was commenting on some weird, depraved shit, and and I was just linking his comments like in my reply, like, "Hey man, is this you?" And immediately, like that, the account is deleted, the comments are all deleted, they're all gone.
Yep.
Just like that is my favorite thing on the planet. Like people who don't realize I can look at your profile and see other things you've said.
Right.
Normally, I'm just looking for things you've said that contradict what you're saying now. Right. But it's even better when I find something really juicy like that. It's like, amazing. Yeah, you're on, like somebody obviously never had a, class about, your online presence.
Yep.
Because colleges, rightfully so, are implementing that a lot. I had a senior seminar where that was a huge portion of that when I was in college. Is about, just keep in mind, employers are going to see everything you post online.
Oh, yeah.
They have people that they pay just to figure out what all your online, usernames are.
So many jobs that are out there that I've worked where I've been able to be part of the hiring process. Mm-hmm. First off, it's almost all bad applicants. And it's crazy how many of them are just vomiting everything about their life onto the internet. And just showing that they are a terrible applicant. Mm-hmm. Whereas just the application alone doesn't tell me much. But the one thing that did surprise me over the years is incomplete applications. Mm-hmm. And I've always filled out every single thing I can. Sometimes there's NAs or whatever. But I cannot believe how many people will submit applications, put their high school name, mm-hmm. no address, no contact phone number, nothing about their grades, maybe at college. And it's like in their job history, they'll say where they worked, and it may say like 2 years. No contact information again. Like,
and there's just gaps in their job history.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So I don't think I mentioned this at all, at least during the podcast. So I have a degree in molecular biology. I'm college educated, currently not using that degree. I plan on using it eventually, but it's hilarious though, because my senior seminar class, which obviously took place my senior year, the whole point of that class is they're getting ready to send you off into the workforce or to grad school or wherever, where applications are going to be a thing. And a lot of that class was teaching us how to fill out an application, how to put together a CV, how to present yourself. And there was a mock interview that we had to do for that class. And when I went to go apply for my job as an EMT, I brought everything. I brought my CV, like all my curriculum from school. I was like, it's overkill. You don't need a college degree, obviously, to be an EMT, but I just want to show them, like, hey, I'm, maybe a little more educated than your average applicant.
Put together with all that.
And my boss, or my manager who interviewed me and was reading over it was just like, what is this? Like, you brought in a folder, you're nicely dressed. It's like 90% of the people that come in here look like they're coming into a black McDonald's.
Yeah.
And they still get hired.
Yeah.
And so it was funny, I didn't get the original spot that I applied for because they had already given it to somebody and the interviews were kind of a just for show thing for that particular spot. It was already spoken for. But they offered me a PRN spot because they're like, we have to have you. They did that with the promise of next time a full-time position opens up, it's yours, and that's exactly what happened. So
that's awesome.
I've been full-time for about 5 years now.
Very cool. Well, heck yeah, man. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
Absolutely.